Este es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate. This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
Esta es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
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 Este es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate. This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
Esta es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
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 Este es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
Esta es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
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 Este es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
Esta es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
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 Este es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
Esta es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
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 Este es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
Esta es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
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 Este es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
Esta es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
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 Este es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
This is the California State Senate.
Esta es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
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 Este es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
They want this down so your face isn't obstructed.
There you go. There you go. So, how was that, huh? So, good afternoon, everybody. I am glad to welcome you to Brea City Hall here today for a joint hearing of the Veteran Affairs Committee and Senate Budget Subcommittee number 4. I'd first like to gratefully recognize my co-chair, Senator Richard Roth from the Riverside area, who's doing double duty today. Not only does Senator Roth chair Senate Budget Subcommittee number 4, he is also a stalwart member of the Senate Committee on Veteran Affairs, of which I am the proud chair. First of all, welcome and thanks to everybody here this afternoon, and also folks who are viewing on either the internet or down the road on demand. Special greetings as well, and thanks to all veterans and family members who may be participating or viewing today's hearing. Also, thank you to the City of Brea for making this very nice facility available. So as we get started on today's informational joint hearing, allow me to briefly describe the hearing purpose and the format of today's informational joint committee hearing. Today's informational hearing will endeavor to provide information and insight on two very important topics affecting California veterans. First, military and veteran employment, and secondly, behavioral health and veteran treatment courts. Each topic will consist of testimony from two panels of accomplished subject matter experts in their respective fields. Because we have a very robust schedule, Senator Roth and I are going to try and gently push the panelists to stay on track for time to the extent possible. We'll also try to ensure some additional time for public comment at the end of the hearing. This hearing should end approximately at 4 p.m. As today's agenda indicates, we're hoping to complete the proceedings by around 4, and I want to make a few more points quickly before we get started this afternoon. First, I'd like to remind and encourage today's panelists that they may submit extended additional written testimony to the Veteran Affairs Committee at any time during the next 2 weeks. This will ensure that they can share all of their valuable knowledge in such a way as to have it properly incorporated into the public record. Second, for everybody watching, the video of this hearing and all written testimony submitted later will be archived and available for viewing on demand via the Veteran Affairs Committee website sometime next week. Also, for those of you interested in veteran education issues, the Veteran Affairs Committee is tentatively planning an additional hearing to conduct fairly soon on the topic of veteran resource centers at our community colleges. As a preface to that hearing, recent studies and testimony before this committee support the premise that well-run veteran resource centers contribute significantly to veteran student academic success and to the maximization of their GI Bill benefits and their success generally in transitioning from military to civilian life. Unfortunately, support for veteran resource centers has not been well standardized across the community college system in California, leading to a situation where some VRCs are well-staffed and effective resources for student vets on some campuses, while others currently offer little by way of resources and support. I see in the audience today, Mark Montgomery's here, whose wife Nancy has been a leading and very forceful advocate on behalf of full funding of veteran resource centers. And I commend Nancy for her work, and I'm sorry she can't join us today. A bill that I recently introduced, working closely with Nancy Montgomery and others, SB 694, will address that problem by creating a baseline standard of services and support across all 114 campuses in the community college system, thereby ensuring that we go further toward meeting our shared obligation to returning vets in support of their pursuits in the next chapter of their post-service lives. I'd like to now invite my colleague, Senator Roth, to make any opening remarks of his own.
Thank you, Senator. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Josh Newman, for including me in this committee hearing. I don't know if you realize it or not, but it's been a long time in Sacramento since we have had a senator take the reins of the Veterans Committee and be as effective as Josh Newman has been and continues to be. These two issues, Work for Warriors, Veterans Employment, and Veterans Treatment Courts, are extremely important issues, issues that we deal with in Sacramento. We need to work as hard as we can to ensure that the veterans in our communities and in our state receive the benefits and the help that they richly deserve. So I look forward to the presentations, and again, thank you, Senator Newman, for allowing me to participate.
Thank you, chairs. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and address the committee. I also want to just first say that on behalf of the Adjutant General and the Governor that we couldn't ask for better leadership in working to ensure that our soldiers and airmen in the California National Guard, the California Military Department, have the jobs they deserve, have the support from the legislature and the Senate that they deserve. So thank you both for your extraordinary leadership in that. But today, I come with some rather challenging news relative to not only veterans unemployment across the state, but unemployment in the ranks of the California Military Department. As we mentioned in our earlier testimony a month or so ago, we were going through an audit or a survey of unemployment and underemployment across our enterprise. We're approximately 2/3 of the way through that, and the numbers that we're getting back are extraordinarily troubling. We continue to see unemployment rates in excess of 16% in some of the rural areas across the state, and 10% in some of the more populated areas. As you well know, that's almost triple what the unemployment rate, the veterans' unemployment rate is in the state, and in excess of 3 times what the across-the-board unemployment rate is. So the challenges continue to remain, and they remain in light of the extraordinary work that Chris does. So for the benefit of everybody, and I think it's important to kind of go back and talk about why Work for Warriors exists and how we're operating it today. In 2012, earlier than that actually, in 2011, we recognized that unemployment across our ranks was an extraordinary readiness issue, and we recognized that very early on. It took us about a year or so to stand up this program, now known Work for Warriors. And what we tried to do there was to ensure that every soldier and airman had a job, because we believe that unemployed service members create such a huge readiness challenge across our ranks. They're disinclined to come to drill because they don't have the money to get there. They're sleeping on their friends' couches. It just creates a huge problem. A good full-time job is the basis for which people can maintain good self-esteem, and they can have a life that they can be proud of, and they can also come to drill and not worry about all the other life challenges associated with being unemployed. So it was a readiness issue, and we addressed it head on. And the program works, and it continues to work. We really recognized about a 25% reduction in the rate of unemployment across our ranks in the first year. And I think a lot of that was low-hanging fruit. Folks that were able to rapidly get jobs did. And we continue to work very aggressively. But as you can tell by the numbers that we've delivered today, the work is still out there. This program needs to continue in order to dramatically improve the rates of unemployment across the military department, and we're working very hard on that. So we talked a little bit about readiness, talked about the fundamental challenge. I want to talk a little bit about how we do Work for Warriors and why it's different than any other program. Work for Warriors is not your standard jobs program. It's not a website. It's not a job fair. It is a one-on-one, very expeditionary, very entrepreneurial engagement between Chris's team and our unemployed service members across our enterprise. We look to touch these individuals on a one-on-one basis. It begins with resume development and coaching and determining where the appropriate job is for them. And then we work with a stable of extraordinary business partners, one of whom is here today, and you'll hear from him later, to ensure that we put the right person with the right job. And that way we can ensure that there's a certain amount of stickiness, that the service members that get these jobs are going to continue in those programs. So it delivers, that's really the unique value proposition of Work for Warriors. It's an individual program where we're touching soldiers and airmen on an individual basis, then ensuring that our business partners are getting these employees that meet their requirements. And we believe that's really the unique value proposition of Work for Warriors. But as I mentioned before, challenges continue to remain. 10 to 16% unemployment is unacceptable, and it's an absolute shame. It shouldn't happen in California. California continues today to be one of 15 states where veterans' unemployment dramatically exceeds unemployment in general, and we absolutely have to fix that, and we're working very, very diligently to do that. And I cannot thank both Senator Roth, Senator Newman, for your incredible leadership in helping us stem the tide of this huge problem. And I will turn it over to Chris, or turn it over to your questions, rather.
Why don't we, if we could hear from Major Mitchell first, and we can, and for Sergeant Oliver, and then address questions to you as a group.
Good afternoon. There we go. Good afternoon. Thank you. Major Chris Mitchell. I'm the current program director of the program Work for Warriors. I'm just going to go into some of the nuts and bolts of the program, so at the tactical level, how we operate and some of the things that we do that we think makes the program a success. First of all, we function essentially like a placement agency, a headhunter agency, a recruiting agency, whatever, any of those, depending on how you look at it and who the customer is at the time. But essentially, we serve all service members, veterans, and spouses in California who need help. And we have a strong focus on post 9/11 veterans, but we never turn away any veteran. How we do that is we connect with organizations who want to hire veterans, public, private, doesn't matter. Anybody who wants to bring veterans onto their team, we get their positions, we find out what the positions they need to fill, and we get those out to our service members and our veterans through multiple means. Social media is huge right now. We use a lot of social media to get the word out, to get the positions posted. We get into transition centers. A really heavy emphasis over the last year has been getting into transition centers, active duty, Camp Pendleton and Naval Base San Diego come to mind there. We have over 12,000 candidates in our database right now who will email those positions out to based on where they live and where they are. And now we're partnering also with CalVet, the new CalTAPS program. That'll be another way to get those positions out there. Once a veteran or service member or spouse says, hey, I'd like to apply for this particular position, that's where we take that applicant and we own them through the entire process. So we will help them not just in general with their resume, here's what a good resume looks like, but we'll help them tailor their resume to that position, and we will give them feedback based on our partnership with that business as it pertains to what that business is looking for and what makes a good quality candidate to that business. We'll take them all the way through that process. On the business partner side, we only ask that we can also send a referral. So we'll help the candidate apply, however the process is for that partner, online usually these days. But then we also say, hey, we'd like to send you a resume for this person, and we send the resume and say why this person is exceedingly qualified for this position and try to give them the advantage over the rank and file of hundreds of people sometimes that are applying for the same position. So to our business partners, the benefits we have here, the business partners, we're a free and informal headhunting recruiter for them. We don't make them sign on a dotted line. As long as they want to hire veterans and they have that spirit, we're going to work within their processes and help them. We're going to pre-screen the people before we send them to them. So it's a free win-win situation for them. From the candidate perspective, we're a free direct connection with that business partner, an advocate on their behalf, somebody who can again assist them to get any kind of advantage they can over the masses of competition, who usually have industry experience as compared to our veterans who are coming out of the military, who have very relevant experience that matters a lot and can really fit in well with these partners, but sometimes it's not recognized because it's not direct industry experience. And then, of course, to the taxpayers, we believe that our cost per placement being very low is a direct benefit to the economy, in that having thousands of unemployed veterans is a much higher tax burden or economic burden on the economy than what we're paying to get these people employed. We run the gambit of industries and of levels of employment. So obviously entry-level and mid-level positions and personnel are mostly what you see in the workforce and mostly what you see coming out of the military, but we go all the way up to the high-end top level. We've placed multiple people for over $100,000 a year with Amazon. We just assisted in getting hired a couple people in the last 2 weeks, one with Northrop Grumman for $75,000 a year, one with Purdue Farms just earlier, this Monday actually, the same thing, $75,000 a year. And multiple situations like that. These are careers that are going forward and people's lives that are changing. But we also have all the way down again to the entry level. And in order to assist that, we also get involved in training. We can directly train for BSIS, the Bureau of Security and Investigative Services in California, in order to get people guard cards and get them right into entry-level work in security. And we've trained over 1,000 of those, and we've only really counted that since 2015, so there's probably quite a few more, but we started really keeping track at that time. And then we also partner with agencies that give IT credentials to veterans. We find the ones that do it for free, and we connect those dots. And we've trained about 50 in different IT backgrounds this year, CompTIA, A+, stuff like that. So again, we run the full gambit of levels of employment, and we think the program is very beneficial to our business partners, our taxpayers, and of course the veterans who use our business services. And I'll go ahead and introduce our next guests here, and we have First Sergeant Damon Oliver, who is an early Work for Warriors placement and also works with for Volt Workforce Solutions, who we continue to work with. And then after him, Mr. Rob McConnell, who is a current business partner of ours.
Hello, committee, Senator Ralph and Newman. I was called upon to come and speak for the Work for Warriors program a month ago, and I was ecstatic. I was excited to come and speak on behalf of the Work for Warriors. I've been on the military side of the house, First Sergeant for the California National Guard for 23 years now. And on the civilian side of the house, I work for Volt Workforce Solutions, which is a partner of the Work for Warriors program. And I left deployment. I was in Iraq 5 years ago, and I came back, and I did not have employment. And a peer of mine came to me and said, do you know about the Work for Warrior program? And I did not know at the time, because I just came from deployment. And they say, you need to go contact the Work for Warrior program. They have a great program. Sure enough, I reached out to them, and they worked with me every step of the way. They helped me with my resume. They knew exactly what my employer, which is Volt, was looking for. They helped me with the words where it would help me get the position, and sure enough, I got the position. And currently, I've been at Volt for 5 years now, and I still work closely with the Work for Warriors program on both sides of the house. As a military liaison for Volt, I work with the Work for Warriors program, and they filter veterans to me to put into my organization. On the military side of the house, being a first sergeant, having soldiers under me, anytime I see a soldier that's not employed, the first thing I say, do you know about the Works for Warrior program? Because what it has done for me. And with that being said, I'm happy to announce that my unemployment rate within my unit is really low. And when you have a low unemployment rate within your unit, then I have soldiers that's ready to come to work, complete the mission, and don't have to worry about rent being paid or food being put on the table. I have soldiers that's engaged because they employed. And this program is very close and very dear to me, and I love it.
Certainly closed on a high note there. And I'm grateful to have you here. So, First Sergeant Oliver, we have actually worked together before through the Orange County Veterans Military Family Collaborative, so I am well aware of the good work you're doing. And so it's nice to have you. Ms. McConnell, welcome.
Thank you. First of all, I'm humbled to be here amongst all of these service members and the cause that we're here to support. I own a staffing and recruitment firm called Top to Bottom Corporation. Prior to starting Top to Bottom, I worked for a CEO for a technology staffing firm out of New York who had a brilliant idea to build a vets program where we transferred military veterans with experience in IT, hardware, similar to stuff you guys are seeing today, and how to transition those skills into the software development lifecycle where wages go up, opportunities go up, and it's really a matter of developing that career, getting a foot in the door and continuing to build. So that's been something that really got me intrigued after starting my company, the values and the disciplines that I learned from my own employees. I managed large deliverables. We've built programs at Experian, Starbucks, Fannie Mae, and these were just things that my last company was doing in that program, but I left learning more from the people that were working in that program than I was in my own academic studies, and it taught me a lot about running a business and how to go forward. So it's not really just that I like hiring veterans or I feel good about hiring veterans. Their principles are the value prop of my business. It is the way we run our business. It's the way we cascade our message. It's what the C-suite of our biggest clients want to hear. The skills they're looking for, people they can manage, people that they can lead, they can make decisions on the fly. These are the people they want me looking for anyway. So when I talk about my interest in working with an organization like Work for Warriors, they immediately can relate to me. They get back to me faster. It's a more productive conversation. It saves me time in the sales process. I'm a capitalist as well. The reason I work with Work for Warriors, there's a lot of organizations I've been exposed to. I've been recognized by a lot of organizations. My last company was recognized as a top 10 employer for veterans in the United States. I work with Work for Warriors because of Major Chris Mitchell and Jessica Folks, who's in the audience today. They make my job easy, similar to Mr. Oliver's story about how they prepare candidates. I run a business. I don't have time to do the dirty work. If I can, Jessica brings the candidates to me ready to be submitted to my candidate or to my clients, and they're going to make me look good. So I'm investing more money currently. I've partnered with the former Chief Information Officer of iHeartMedia, and we're creating a platform where we're actually selling to other staffing companies the technology that's going to allow military veterans and other people transitioning skill sets to be automatically uploaded into their database and instantly deployable, where the service member will own their own profile that's readable by every staffing company. So when Jessica reaches out to me, and I only have so many opportunities, she's now reaching out to Mr. Oliver Volt, who I worked with their president in my previous role, their vice president in my previous role, and they supported every one of my military objectives. So the Work for Warriors is working with the right people, and they do what it takes to get guys to work and gals to work, and it's really, really important that nobody gets in that way.
And thank you all for your testimony so far. I am remiss. Let me take a moment. I'd like to acknowledge some folks who are here. First, we have a couple of mayors I'm pleased to see. They somehow snuck in without me noticing. Corey Warshaw is the mayor of West Covina. Welcome. Ray Marquez, mayor of Chino Hills. Good to see you, sir. And also Justice Eileen Moore, who's an associate justice of the California Court of Appeals and also a combat nurse, having served in Vietnam. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. And Hugh Crooks, who is a member and the vice chair of the California Veterans Board. So, Hugh, thank you for attending, and we're grateful to have you. I'd like to just ask a few questions. And to start, California is obviously a huge state. Population of 40 million. According to census data, we have a veteran population, about 1.8 million, of whom not all are in their employment years, but it's obviously a very large cohort. And so, Major Mitchell, I just to start with you, my observation, having worked in veteran employment for a couple of years, is I was always struck by how large the state is and how distributed the workforce is, and not every region is the same. And so what are your thoughts on scaling your program to extend outward and encompass as many vets as possible? And I think, to my mind, just as importantly, and we'll hear testimony from some local folks, how do we integrate your work with the work of either public programs like EDD and the county programs through the one-stops, but also the nonprofits that in any particular region are engaging vets, but in some cases aren't necessarily in a good position to connect them to opportunities. What we clearly need is a better nexus for connecting talent to employers across the economy. So I'd like to hear a little bit from you folks how you look out and are maybe working toward that goal.
Yes, sir. Very good question, and I'll try to address all parts of it here. As far as reaching the geographic challenge of California, huge state, so many different mini economies and living areas and environments. So over the last year or so, we've distributed and dispersed amongst the state. So we started off just in Sacramento back in 2012, and over the last year we've moved. We have now 2 positions in San Diego, 1 in Orange, 2 in LA, and 1 in the Bay Area, in addition to our resource managers that we still have in Sacramento. So forming those relationships face-to-face has been an important part of our process, building trust with those business partners. And so by decentralizing, I think we've been able to really reach out to these different aspects of different geographic locations in California. So specifically, as I kind of mentioned earlier in testimony, we've been at the door of Camp Pendleton and Naval Base San Diego. Between those 2 centers alone, they transition over 5,000 Marines and sailors that want to stay in California every year. So they transition like 3 times that amount, but about a third of them, 20 to 30% of them, or a little bit more than that, want to stay in California. So we've been really fully integrated with them over the last 7 or 8 months. Naval Base San Diego, same thing. We're getting in there really well. And of course, we also work with all the kind of the big transition centers in California. So March Air Force Base, Fort Irwin, Travis, Beale, and even Fort Lewis or Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington also sends a lot of people. A lot of people come back home here to California or want to move to California when they leave there. So that's what we're doing really as our main effort to reach those people throughout the geographic dispersion of the state. And then as far as partnerships and integrating with other efforts, both at the state level and then, federal, agencies, whoever it is that has a role and has takes an interest in this effort with us. One of the great things about our program is from day one, before I ever worked there, the environment that was established was one of cooperativeness amongst other agencies. So we don't have a high threat aspect. We're not threatened by other agencies doing the same thing. Like you said, there's 1.8 million veterans in California. There's 5.4% unemployment amongst our veterans in California right now. There's plenty of people out there who need help. And so by coordinating with the other agencies and other organizations and unifying efforts, we've been extremely successful in getting the word out and finding these people who need help, and it's a force multiplier for us. Again, CalTAPS with CalVet is kind of the most forefront of our efforts right now. The program is just standing up, and as you well know, they'll be addressing many issues for veterans in the transition process here in California, and we want to be on the forefront of the effort for employment with them. So that's just one example of how we try to integrate with those other agencies and organizations.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So Sergeant Oliver is apparently, you're just large enough that you're perfectly screening the mayor of Brea. I'm really sorry. So I'd like to welcome and thank the mayor of Brea, Cecilia Hupp. I am so sorry not to have seen you. And so if you would, could we have a big round of applause for Brea for hosting? So you can blame that broad-shouldered man in the front there. And so I'll turn it over to Senator Roth. Any questions, sir?
Thank you. Gentlemen, I'd like to have a slightly more detailed report on the program in terms of results and costs. So let me start with this question. I know you mentioned you had 6 individuals deployed at various locations in the state. How many total folks work on the Work for Warriors program?
We have 18 total, sir. We sometimes pick up temporary positions depending on the budget year and stuff like that. So we have 1 temporary right now as well.
And what's the total state cost for the program?
$670,000, sir.
Okay. Now let's talk about program results. How many employers do you have in your employer pool?
Well over 400 to this point. And going back to the kind of entrepreneurial spirit and leanness of the program, doesn't mean obviously that 18 people are working with 400 employers all at once, but seasons come and go of different employment and jobs and stuff, and so we're constantly bouncing back and forth between who needs us, but overall over 400, sir.
And in terms of placements, since the inception of the program, either that figure or maybe annually, how many individuals have you placed?
Grand total of placements assisted is over 5,700 now since the inception of the program. It comes out to right around 3 per day total, yeah, that's what we're at right now, sir.
And what's your placement rate? In other words, when you touch a serviceman or servicewoman, what's your placement rate?
It would look to be right around 50%. We've got a little over 1,200, enrolled, assigned, requested help with us, and having again almost 6,000, right around 50% placement, probably.
Pretty extraordinary.
Thank you, sir.
Given the fact that this is a military operation, you must have goals and objectives for the future. So, what are those?
Absolutely, sir. Right now, when we began with just the National Guard, as General Beavers mentioned, I think we had some immediate success because there was such a high need. And so, you call it low-hanging fruit, a little bit, easier placements. So we had an extraordinary rate back then. And of course, it's kind of leveled off over time. So right now, we look at a goal of 800 to 900 placements assisted per year. And we've fallen right in between that the last couple of years. 830 something has been kind of the average over the last couple of years. And that's, again, after opening it up to all veterans in the state and working on some other initiatives.
Now, do you have a plan to attempt to expand that placement rate and or expand your employer pool? And if so, how do you plan to accomplish either or both of those goals?
Absolutely, sir. So on the placement side, we're not seeking more additional funding or personnel or anything. I think we're at a point now where we're lean enough to be very agile and entrepreneurial and open-minded to different ideas and go where we need to go. But we're also large enough to serve a lot of people at one time. So the placements will probably, per year at this rate, at this amount of money that we have budget-wise, would probably be, pretty steady. I think 800 to 900 is a reasonable goal. As far as business partners, in order to make that 800 to 900, we constantly need new business partners. And we accomplish that by, we attend all kinds of job fairs for the main reason of, it's not, people aren't necessarily going to come out of a job fair with a job, but we can go there on the business side and meet different business partners. And that really has been a major key to our success, is finding the right people at the right time. There are always positions out there. There's always employment out there. You have to hit the right industry at the right time, and you have to have a huge diversity of partners in order to find those links that you need. So,
now, your funding has been pretty level the last couple of years.
Yes, sir.
What would you need in order to increase your placement rate, to build a larger pool of employers and expand your presence? Is that a fair question?
It's an absolutely fair question, Senator. And I think we can get you those numbers. We don't have those today, but we can lay that on a graph and and articulate it in no uncertain terms that if we can continue to grow the program, we can continue to grow the number of placements that we get. Here's what scares me going forward, and some of that we really have to consider. Two things. We're 2 more years, we'd be into the largest recovery in the nation's history. That's not going to last forever. And when we have to start competing in that environment, on top of mobilizing 2,000 to 4,000 people out of our organization every year, and that's what's coming, that's a perfect storm to put us back in the position that we were at when we first started addressing this problem in 2011. Starting in September or so of this year, 2,000 folks are going out, and then in a year from now, we'll have 4,000 folks out total deployed. Coupled with a potential for a turn in the economy, that's a recipe for absolute disaster. And then when that starts to happen, it compounds. The people will get out because they won't stay in. They'll assume that they have to get out to maintain full-time employment. Our strength will go down. It'll have a cascading effect that I do not particularly want to contemplate. That said, we need to continue to fund Work for Warriors. We can grow the program with more money, and I think now's the time to do it, because if we don't, these things are going to occur. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And if we can continue to grow the program and gain some more traction, better foothold, especially with our business partners, as Chris said, I think we're in a position a position of relative advantage in a situation where we can really make a positive change. And I just wanted to share that with you. That's kind of what keeps me up at night on this issue.
Well, I appreciate the seriousness of the issue and what could be coming in the future. And I realize this is a sensitive issue and a sensitive question because you are the California Military Department, which is a Department of State Government, and
Yes,
there's
sir.
a process to be followed. But I would appreciate the opportunity to secure some data with respect to what it would take to expand the program. And I don't know if it's a certain number of dollars per placement or there's some other indicator that in response to a question from somebody like me, you could legitimately respond and we could evaluate whether expansion is something doable either
Right.
this budget year or a budget year in the future. Well, let me shift and ask about impediments to success. I guess I can start with access to the active duty transition centers. At one point that was somewhat of a problem. How is that today?
It's improved dramatically, Senator. And again, I know I mentioned the Camp Pendleton and Naval Base San Diego relationships. Military organizations want to take care of their own. That's in our nature, as you know, obviously. And so I think that's some of the barriers sometimes that we get with getting into different installations and working with different components. But it has been very positive lately, and we've seen the same positiveness with Beale Air Force Base, Travis Air Force Base. So it's actually moving in the great direction.
So given the fact that you have relationships with the Navy in San Diego and the Marine Corps at Camp Pendleton, do those relationships translate into relationships at other Marine Corps installations in the state, other naval installations?
Yes, sir. So the follow-on from Camp Pendleton was Miramar, and smaller population, obviously, but also a different skill set. And so that was a great benefit also. And those things, I do believe that came directly as a result of the relationship that we built with Camp Pendleton and with Marine Corps Community Services.
And those are obviously urban areas. What about 29 Palms and other more remote installations?
Right, sir. So, for instance, 29 Palms and Fort Irwin are both installations that we probably in the last 4 months we've really started to dig in there. So we're making progress. And the transition centers have been very receptive as well. So things are going positive there also.
I think my colleague wants to follow up, but before, let me just ask one. Are there any other impediments that you see looking out on the horizon at this point to your continued success with Work for Warriors other than funding?
Yeah, other than funding, sir, I do not see any at the time, but I'll definitely also, take a look at that specifically and come back with any follow-ups.
Absolutely, sir.
Yeah, and from Chris's perspective, I think he's absolutely right. So I think if you take a look at it from a state whole of government approach, I think there's a lot that we can do to help my soldiers and airmen and help veterans across the state. And I think that's, we have to take a look at how do we solve this problem holistically, because at the end of the day, Matt Beavers is responsible for getting his soldiers and airmen jobs. That's my responsibility. And I believe we do that quite well. But it is the state's responsibility to look at it from a very holistic perspective and do that work. And I believe we're trying very, very hard to do that. The experience that we had when we worked with EDD back in 2015, I thought was a very good one. And I thought we delivered a lot of value to both EDD and to the state. And we hope that one day we can continue to do that work because it worked. And we were able to really demonstrate, the entrepreneurial nature of Work for Warriors and how, if we can integrate that mindset, the expeditionary mindset, across the entire enterprise and bring folks together in a motivated fashion to do things effectively and efficiently, I think we could go a long ways in the state to not being one of those 15 countries, or 15 states rather, where vets unemployment exceeds enterprise-wide unemployment.
Well, I commend you for your efforts, colleague.
Thank you. So I want to build a little bit on that question about how best to serve vets, specifically vets coming back to California from points far away. California, unsurprisingly, large state in the nation, sends the most young men and women into the armed forces, and many of them, in fact, the majority, serve elsewhere. And so this, in my experience, is the most vexing question. How do we engage those soldiers coming home or relocating to California from other states, installations outside California, in an effective way? And in this case, how can we build on your program to sooner engage them and to incorporate them into the larger effort to connect them to employers who would benefit from their talents? Because something on the level of the majority of veterans coming home or have served outside California, and that that is where we find the highest rates of unemployment. And this is a vexing question. I would add to that, in doing that, how can we work better across different jurisdictions, specifically other programs, not just public programs like EDD, but how can we create a better set of partnerships, more connectivity with all of the different organizations that are endeavoring to help vets? Because it seems to me, based on my experience, that that's where we are most efficient at the moment. I'd be interested in your thoughts there.
Yes, Senator. So two answers to that from our perspective on the ground. Number one, we do conduct visits to the transition centers out of state as well. And that's something that we need to put a little more effort towards. That could tie into one of the questions earlier about what we could use in order to make that happen, and I'll research that thoroughly. But that we do go out there, we do connect with those different transition centers. It's a little more difficult because, for instance, at Camp Pendleton, we have an office in Camp Pendleton now, so that connection is there all the time. That relationship gets built with the transition folks, with the transitioning veterans, and with the local businesses. And obviously, we can't do that being here in California. We can't station our employees in other states. However, we do make those visits and we try to build those relationships and keep them going. And then the second way, which I think is the more strategic way to address that issue, is, again, going back to CalTAPS and CalVet. Now, it's a very new program, and I can't, I don't want to in any way speak on behalf of it, but I believe a part of that effort is going to be to identify these people who are transitioning in California. So for us to be integrated with them at the time of identifying where these veterans are coming in at, when they get here, when they're on their way here, and us being able to be part of that solution, I think is gonna be our best strategic way forward to answer that question, to actually connect with our returning veterans who served elsewhere.
I appreciate that. So, just to add, that to me, biggest problem is we have vets coming home. If we don't engage them soon in a high cost of living, challenging environment like California, the skills they have to offer quickly atrophy, and they find themselves very challenged. The federal TAP program doesn't work particularly well in that regard. I've been told at different times there are privacy issues, that there's administrative reasons why we can't affect a deeper engagement with the Department of Defense, for instance. Doesn't really make any sense when you consider that most soldiers leaving the active duty services have some level of reserve obligation. And as such, they're required to keep the Department of Defense apprised of their whereabouts. Why can't we track them, engage them, and serve them better?
Senator, I think we can and we should. I don't think we do a good job of that right now. I think. So let me take this from the perspective of Work for Warriors. The reason Work for Warriors is so fundamentally sound and works so well is because we are extraordinarily entrepreneurial. We don't rely on making people crank 50 forms and spend hours and hours on the computer in order for them to avail themselves of our services. At the end of the day, we just want to get people jobs. So I think we need to change our mindset on how we do this work, and that's challenging. Especially if there's a lot of federal dollars associated with. There's very onerous reporting requirements to ensure that the money is being spent in accordance with the congressional mandate. So there's some hurdles there, but I think CalVet is on a track to do that work. I think their TAP program is much better than what we had in the past. I think the leadership there is well motivated to do this work, so I think we have to start taking a very entrepreneurial approach to this and try to keep as much of the bureaucracy at bay as we can, while still maintaining our commitments and reporting requirements based on our funding. But we need to not hide behind that, and we need to get out in front and simply just do the work.
Appreciate that, Senator Roth.
Thank you. Let me just ask a question. It's my understanding, for example, that a veteran can now have a driver's license designation. I believe that's the case. If it isn't,
I'm not sure, Senator.
Somebody can correct me, but
Right.
my question is this. Are you able to access the information that the DMV has and or the EDD has with respect to the veteran status of individuals in their systems? For example, if you have a soldier or an airman, a Marine separating from service on the East Coast, we don't necessarily know where they're actually going to wind up, even though their home of record may be California. But for those whose home of record is Ohio and they wind up in California, it is possible that they're going to have a connection with the DMV, and if there is a designation, that data point will be there. And two, they may have a connection with the EDD with respect to employment. So if you're not able to access those data points in those two organizations, and there may be others, then we ought to explore why, and if there's a possibility to make that connection happen, we ought to do it. I assume that there's no connectivity at this point.
Not as far as I know. The place we could also make that connection is in the transition programs at the post-CAMSA stations these kids are coming from, because typically you'll do a permanent change of station, and the documentation will say where your household items and household goods are going to. So I think that's a place to start. But to answer your question, I don't believe that we have access to the DMV's database on that. I could check on EDD. There's a potential there, but I just don't know.
Well, we'll have to work with you on that. And lastly, do you communicate the Work for Warriors program to veterans through the HAT organizations, American Legion, VFW, and some of the AMVETS? And
we do, and I can let Chris expound on that.
Absolutely, sir, and that's been geographically dispersing throughout the state has been an integral part of forming those relationships. So, again, just like all of our relationships within the program, we really promote, just like in the military in general, initiative, and so that entrepreneurial spirit. So by sending people in different to different regions of the state, we've connected with multiple different organizations like that. So we partner with different VSOs and other community-based organizations that have the same goals in mind. That's definitely and we it goes beyond employment at that point too. When we dealing with unemployment, we're going to run into veterans who have household issues, as far as family issues or home issues, homelessness issues, and us 18 can't fix everything, as far as the problems associated with multiple deployments and some of these other issues we face as veterans, but we can connect them with our partners who do have resources for that. So we have many very good partners that are associated with those types of that kind of help.
Well, you've done an extraordinary job with very, very few resources, so you all should be very, very proud of yourselves. Thank you, Senator Newman.
And I, too, would like to thank you both for the work and for your testimony today. Any closing thoughts from this panel? But again, grateful for your participation.
Senator, I just and we just can't thank you enough for the great work that you've done on behalf of our soldiers and airmen. So thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to all four of you for participating. Very good. Let me thank you once again and call up our next panel. The next segment within the workforce development section of this hearing will speak specifically to innovations in workforce development and job placement at the local level. And we are fortunate to have two local leaders here whom I know well. And I'd welcome you down to the table and look forward to your testimony. So, as a preface to the next panel, and thank you so much to the Work for Warriors team, we've spoken a little bit about nonprofits and about the sort of local efforts. A staggering statistic that most people may or may not know. So the number of nonprofits in the United States that have veteran or military somewhere in their mission is over 40,000. And so we who have worked on veteran employment for a while are aware and well aware that in many cases our lack of success in certain areas is not attributable to lack of effort, and it's certainly not attributable to lack of organization. So we have with us two representatives from two very good organizations that have been deeply involved in the greater LA area. And so Chase Wickersham, representing the Tierney Center for Veteran Services, and Marion Profeta with the VetNet program from Working Wardrobe. So welcome to both of you. What I'd like to do is get your thoughts initially on the state of play in veterans employment, but kind of that also the larger context in which the work takes place locally, and how we can best serve our vets across all vet cohorts, young, old. But I'd also be interested in your thoughts about how we can better work together across jurisdictions, but also across spheres. And so by that I mean most people will accept kind of intuitively that the situation of a vet, irrespective of their age, as it relates to work, a lot of that is dictated by other parts of their life. Their home situation, their finances, their family, behavioral health issues, legal issues, all of that, that's my new watch, all of that comes into play, and I know that you've had some experience with that, so your insight would be greatly appreciated here. Mr. Wickersham, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. And as you pointed out, Senator Newman, we have a number of agencies in this area that are focused on veteran employment. I want to mention, in addition to being the executive, the director of the Tierney Center for Veteran Services at Goodwill, Orange County, I'm also an appointee of Supervisor Steele on the Orange County Veteran Advisory Council, and also a member of, as Marianne is also a member of the collaborative, the Orange County Veteran and Military Family Collaborative, which is an effort on our part to get these agencies to talk together in order to be more efficient in terms of the services that they're providing. There's a couple of things that I wanted to address in my opening comments. And you've already mentioned it, both Senator Roth and yourself has mentioned the fact that in many cases we just lack the details. We lack the information. We don't have good solid numbers. We're surprised constantly. I'm constantly surprised at the number of veteran unemployed and underemployed. And I want to say a few words about underemployment as well as unemployed veterans. If we can get management buy-in to the hiring process, which I think we're doing a pretty good job of, that support alone just isn't enough to get our veterans hired. the biggest barrier to employment for the veteran or the soldier is the HR resume screening process. If the HR professional is not trained, they often assume that the candidate who has served in the military or is currently serving is a risk to their company. That perceived risk can be for PTSD, which they don't usually understand, lack of specific experience, maybe a confusing resume with military jargon, or an assumption that the reservist will be pulled off the job at any moment. Stigma is definitely an issue when you talk about employment for veterans. And we feel that training is vital to educate the HR professional about the attributes that veterans offers that we've already gone over with the previous panel. If we had funding to train HR professionals, I think it would have an immediate impact on hiring veterans, guardsmen, and reservists. An example would be UCI last fall had a one-day event that attracted HR professionals from 60 different companies, and would be an excellent model for training HR professionals in the community and eliminating this problem we have in the screening process. It's not so much that the companies don't want to hire veterans, is that the HR in many cases rejects the resume and rejects the veteran in the early screening process because they feel it's a risk. And we have to overcome that. The other thing I wanted to mention quickly is underemployment. We see constantly individuals who are stuck in a job. Usually that job does not reflect his potential or his military experience, his leadership experience. It doesn't provide a living wage. The underemployment affects his performance and adds significant stress to his family. The veteran needs a mentor or a career counselor to move his career forward, either within the current company or to a better position with another company. Underemployment means that the Guard and Reservist will not be at their best in uniform and can put the unit at risk. Underemployment affects companies and military units as employees, poses a significant financial and safety risk. Current programs, unfortunately, don't focus on the underemployed, and our biggest problem is identifying them. We have a serious, particularly for veterans that are in the community, they don't self-identify. They come to us usually late. We don't have an opportunity to work with them early in the process. And if we could identify them, if we could get to them, that usually gives us a much better chance of putting them in an appropriate career rather than just a job, and helping them maintain that career. Our database at the Turney Center, for instance, identifies employed and seeking, which is a step in the right direction in trying to identify underemployed veterans in the field and soldiers, and trying to give them the support so we can place them in a career that is satisfying and will give them the opportunities that their experience lends itself to. So thank you very much for inviting us.
And thank you for your testimony. And so welcome to Ms. Profeta.
Thank you, Senator Newman. Thank you, Senator Roth, for the invitation to be here today. I'd like to address two issues as well, and one of them that Chase already touched on is the underemployment issue. And I'd also like to talk today a little bit about the military to civilian transition, especially the mindset around that. Just to throw out a few facts to support what Chase said, approximately 1 out of 2, it's actually 53% of separating post 9/11 veterans will face a significant period of unemployment. While national unemployment rates have declined, the on-the-ground reality is that half of our veterans enter a period of unemployment upon transition. In 2016, the unemployment rate for all veterans was 4.3%. I know that you're hearing a lot of statistics today. Not all the numbers equal each other. It depends on where you get your information. But that's the information from the Swords to Plowshares advocacy organization up in the Bay Area. So 4.3%, that's not a bad number. However, the underemployment rate for our nation was 8.6%. So our nation, but for veterans, in just April of this year. That's exactly double. There was a study that was commissioned by the Orange County Community Foundation that USC conducted, and it found that 28% of the Orange County veterans, it was very specific to Orange County, are underemployed. 28%, that's a high percentage. But what does that mean exactly? Our veterans and our reservists and our guards are taking part-time jobs when they first transition out, when they really want full-time career positions. Veterans really want to work. They want to get back to work in the civilian arena, and they're not relying on the full term of their unemployment benefits. So some of these obstacles to employment are overcoming stigma and stereotypes like Chase mentioned, a really good, accurate skills translation, what their MOS was into what they want to do, and it doesn't always translate, and it doesn't always mean that that's what they want to do, what they just completed in the military. Many business leaders and hiring professionals don't know enough about military culture and the hierarchy that is present there. And like Chase said, we totally support as well more education of the HR departments and the hiring managers. We, for example, at Working Wardrobes, we're working very closely with PIRA, the Professionals in Human Resources Association, as well as NHRA, National Human Resources Association, not the Hot Rod Association, to educate our employer partners, but it's still not enough. So all of these statistics are very sobering, but what I'd like to do is take what we've heard and put a human face to it. So I'd like to share with you a success story. We first met Robert, of course not his real name, at our annual Career Success event at Camp Pendleton. There were 100 Marines and sailors there that day, participating in the various services that we were providing. We were targeting those who were active duty, but they would be transitioning out within 60 days. We provided resume and interview assistance, your pretty standard career development tools. We also had an employer panel of recently transitioned military who were now successfully employed. And of course, at the end, in our name, we provided a success suit with the aid of a personal shopper. So Robert was transitioning out after 20 years in the Marines. He was 38 years old, had never had a civilian job, but he was very eagerly looking forward to transferring his skills as a logistics expert into a successful career. After all, he had just literally moved tons of materials and supplies from Camp Pendleton to Iraq and Afghanistan very successfully over the last years. But Robert was unable to find a job. In his words, he said, "I sent out 100 resumes last year, the last year of my military service, but I never got one response. I was terrified that I would never be able to take care of my family again." He became very despondent and even contemplated suicide. He thought that would be the best way to provide for the family he was unable to support in this new civilian world. He remembered the card he received from the case manager at VetNet at the day he received his success suit, and he gave him a call. So Robert went through the Power Up, which is a transitional program that we offer at Working Wardrobes, and through our entire VetNet program, and even involved his wife and his children in the process. At the time, we were in need of a donation center manager, and we hired Robert ourselves. He stayed with us for about a year, made some important connections to our corporate partners, and was offered recently a career position with a relocation company. He's really excelling on the job over the last 3 months and has doubled his salary. This transition period is unique to each individual, and we should not force this transition period into a specific time frame. It's like General Beaver said, he mentioned that one-to-one and how important that is, and it's absolutely true. We need to customize our programs and meet each veteran where they are and find out what their needs are. So Robert told us, "I would never have survived in this job without the transition job you provided. I had to learn a new way of communicating, and the coworkers were very different from my military coworkers. I just didn't know how to adjust." So that's just an example of some of the veterans that we serve and that we hope to continue to serve as we find new ways to collaborate with other agencies and work together.
Thank you very much for your testimony. So let me ask a question not dissimilar to one we asked to the previous panel, regarding transition, regarding how we better sort of engage early and successfully vets who are coming out of the active duty services in ways that get them started on a smarter path. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, as I mentioned, I think it's really important to be present before the active duty is actually transitioning out. We all know about the TAPS program, a lot of different opinions on that, but it's really important that we do make that connection early on and let them know that there is help out there when they transition. A lot of the active duty, they're very excited to transition out. They just want to make that transition be a success, and then they find when they're out a couple months that it's not that easy. So I think the earlier that we can get to them, the better.
We also have identified very quickly the fact that if we don't get to them early and after 100 resumes get sent out and after they get beat up in the field, they are not very good candidates. They're depressed and they don't have the optimism that they need in order to attract the attention of the decision makers in the corporation during the employment process. So we want to reach them early. And that has to be done many cases after they've already arrived. And so the visibility of the services through the collaboratives, the visibility of the services through the community colleges, which sees many of those transitioning vets very quickly, because most of them use the GI Bill and take advantage of that, is important. We've reached out to all of the veteran resource centers. I think the veteran resource centers and their effectiveness is increasingly important in identifying the resources in the community, trying to find and make sure that we communicate what resources are available to these veterans so they can become part of the process as early as possible.
And so let me ask you a different question based on your experience. So I am personally not convinced of the value of job fairs. I've certainly seen more than my fair share. It strikes me as kind of an odd way to try to broker talent between employers and vets, that on a particular day you'd get X number of vets and Y number of employers and put them together in an auditorium. And in my experience, especially working with vets, it doesn't lead to success. And moreover, to Mr. Williams' point, I think it has often the opposite effect. It leaves vets feeling despondent, less optimistic, and less well-equipped than they started. So what are your thoughts on job fairs, and what are your thoughts on better alternatives, particularly in this area?
Both Marianne and I have worked together to put another model together to compete with the traditional job fair at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday, where we normally get more HR people than we get veterans. And certainly it's inappropriate for reaching out to underemployed veterans who are working desperately and obviously aren't available at 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursday. Our new model is in the evening. We call it a Career Pathways program. It usually includes food. We bring in 2 industry representatives. We work together with our partners in the community to make sure that we've identified companies that are somewhat complementary, maybe in the same industry. The focus of the meeting is to provide information to the candidates, to the veterans, as to what the cultures are, what type of information they should be communicating, what the companies are looking for. It's a much more information-oriented event, and where job fairs are drawing 25 veterans, we're getting 75. And it's been very useful in identifying veterans in the marketplace that need help and that are interested in finding out more information. So I agree with you. I think a new model is necessary.
Right, and let me ask a slightly different question, but it probably overlaps. What has been your experience as nonprofits working with publicly funded organizations? Particularly our state and county programs. What are the challenges? Where are you finding opportunities for success?
We definitely partner with, I think you're referring to the one-stop centers and EDD. And a lot of that is mandated sometimes by the grants that we receive. We have one federal grant through the Department of Labor, and that does mandate us to work and co-enroll all of our clients with the EDD and with the one-stop centers. And not only that, we do other things with them when we have, because they are also part of the collaborative, the Orange County Veterans and Military Family Collaborative. And so through that means we work with them to do different events. The Career Pathways System, that program that Chase mentioned, is just phenomenally successful. We now have a program once a month. We have the entire year already laid out for the different industries. Next week we'll be having, we have 3 employers coming on public safety. So we'll have the FBI there. We will also have a local police department there. So this program is growing. And like Chase said, when we can get 65 veterans in a room to learn about opportunities, it's so much better than them going table to table. So it's been amazingly successful. But we also work very closely with the 2 one-stops in Orange County, as well as the independent ones of Anaheim and Santa Ana, where we have a presence there. We'll go there and we'll talk to the veterans there, and they can co-enroll in our program.
If I can add something, collaboration is absolutely critical in order to solve this problem, in order to provide a more efficient system, in order to find jobs, good jobs for unemployed and underemployed veterans. The collaboration works with the public and private agencies, and the public agencies, EDD, the VSO office of the county, the one-stops, they see a lot of veterans, and now that they're participating in the collaborative and in the working groups of the collaborative, we're beginning to share information across agencies, and that's a big deal. There is unfortunately no common database among service providers, and at some point in the future, the issue of a common database has to be addressed. CalVets is involved in some programs right now that may provide a solution to that. San Diego has made some progress over the last few years with the possibility of linking service providers to a common database, but I think that's going to be the next critical step in order to provide more efficient programs.
So, and you actually anticipated my next question. So, what should be the role of technology in the veteran employment development process? I have personally seen no shortage of sort of purported magic cures, a website that would do everything, including translate your military skills to your resume and then connect you to jobs. And the fact is, if they worked, we would have solved this problem a long time ago. So, in my experience, despite the abundance of choices, that is not how vets find work. And so, in your experience, what is the right sort of implementation relationship to these technologies?
I think technology is very important. However, we are nonprofit organizations, and funding plays a huge role in that. It depends on where the funding comes from. We have funding from many different sources, and we have to have individual programs. So the metrics are different for each program. It depends on the funder. It depends on the information that they want us to gather. Also, it's sharing that information. What are the legal ramifications of sharing the Social Security number, what kind of help they've looked for, whether they're homeless or not. There is a database for the homeless, the HRIS system, but there's nothing like that for employment. It might cross a line. I don't think we're there yet to completely share all the information because of the funding issue. If there was a central source for funding that we were all on the same page, I think that would make a big difference. And I can give you an example. Swords to Plowshares. Thanks to Chase, he connected us to that organization. They just recently had a grantee meeting at our location of all their California grantees, brought them all together so that we could discuss best practices and talk about the issues, and we have shared metrics. So yes, we are going to share that information at that time, but we're not putting all of our clients into one database. And there are several Orange County organizations that are under that funding. So I think that until we work out all the details of that, it's going to be hard to have one central database.
Appreciate that. So, Ms. Wickstrom, anything to add? Senator Roth.
Thank you. I'm just curious, you mentioned that obviously the best time to first come in contact with a veteran needing a job is when they're leaving active duty. Do you have a seat at the table in the transition programs that currently exist or operate on active military installations, either you or someone like you?
We have a limited seat at the table. We do work at Camp Pendleton. We do 2 annual events there, one for the men and one for the women. We serve the men in March. We'll be serving the women in October. We also work through the Family Readiness Office, and we're there every Friday to meet with the transitioning Marines and sailors and talk to them and let them know about our services.
Well, what impediments exist that prevent you from performing your job with respect to military members and securing civilian employment?
I think establishing the services that the nonprofits and the veteran service organizations have to be able to get the word out to those transitioning. It's very limited. Maybe we can go and speak to a group maybe once a year.
And who sets those limits? I mean, I understand we had military folks here before, and they go to the gate, show an ID card, and they're on. What's the limiting factor for you? Do you have to negotiate individually or as a group with the installation commanders of these installations in order to gain permission to come on base or post? And
each agency has to apply for that approval in order to get on base. And so it is limited in many cases, and in some cases we can work together. There's an organization in San Diego called 0800 that has very good military access. We've actually given them office space in our facility so that they can move into Orange County and provide some of those contacts they have at Pendleton, at the Navy in San Diego. But it's very difficult for most of the agencies. It's very difficult to get access to the posts and to the TAPS programs.
I mean, I could understand why a post commander or an installation commander might not want to do these onesie, twosie kinds of things, but I don't understand why there's not a more organized approach to this. You're not selling stocks and bonds to GIs or insurance policies. You're providing a service that is I assume, a free service that connects a military member with a job. So you would think the Department of Defense would have a vested interest in providing an organized way for agencies such as yours, service providers such as you, to get on base and provide this service. For a while, the military department was having a problem, and CalVet was having a problem, and that frustrated me no end. They seem to have somewhat solved their problem, and now we need to turn our focus on folks like you and figure out a way to have an organized approach so that you can deliver your services and improve the lives of these military members who are moving from uniform to civilian clothes. I don't understand why the Secretary of Defense just doesn't sign a memo to the base commanders, because I guarantee you if that occurred, they'd all be jumping through hoops and you wouldn't have this problem.
I think Mary Ann would agree with me that we have limited access.
We need to focus on that. Not a lot of time here today to explore it fully, but it's certainly something that I know my colleague to my left is interested in, and we need to fix that problem for you.
And I will add, you folks are being awfully diplomatic. There is some level of competitive sort of dynamic to this, right? There's a limited amount of capacity. There are relationships that people build, and there's, in my experience, and you can disagree with it, there's a certain amount of competition among organizations which seems to deter this happening efficiently. Is that not your experience?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, looking at the guardsmen and the reservists, and we have a very good relationship with the Joint Forces Training Base in Los Alamitos. I don't think they have a good handle on how many vets are unemployed. I mean, not vets, but how many soldiers are unemployed and underemployed, so that we can identify them and so that we can work with them. There's a stigma attached to being unemployed. In some cases, they're not communicating that very effectively. Certainly underemployed poses all kinds of other problems in terms of identifying the soldiers so that we can work with them and move them in the direction of something that's a little more appealing in terms of their careers.
Well, I assume you don't have a problem with the National Guard facilities, Air and Army in the state.
Oh, don't assume.
Do you have a problem accessing the
we have had situations where we have asked for information, specific information, not 5%, 8% or whatever, but at the meeting next weekend, how many soldiers can we address? How many soldiers should we be talking to in order to address their unemployment issues or maybe their underemployment issues? And when we go to those meetings and we're given access through the command structure, people come out of the woodwork and say they need help. And that always surprises me. I'm always surprised at the numbers of people that are looking for help. So I don't think that information is easily available or that it's being massaged and analyzed probably in a way that it could be.
Well, I don't want to belabor this, but how do you, what system and process do you have to access the Air and Army National Guard facilities in the state, or at least in your region? Is it a regularized process?
Personal relationships with various commands
but are you able to regularly gain access?
Yes.
Okay.
At the unit level, yes.
Because that's a problem. We can fix that problem.
Yes. No, I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is, in many cases, understanding within that command who the individuals are, that the resources should be brought to bear in order to give them an opportunity to solve some of their problems.
Well, I suspect it's sort of tough if you're a sergeant to go to your captain or your major and tell them that you're underemployed and you're barely making it and you need help. So
we have the word stigma is appropriate. We have stigma at that level, but we also have stigma at the employer level, at the HR screening process, which I think is a critical barrier that we have to overcome in order to get better jobs and more jobs for the unemployed and underemployed veterans that we're working with.
Well, we'll work with you on that. I want to make sure, at least inside the boundaries of the state of California, non-active duty installations, which we have limited control over, that the process works and you can continue to do the extraordinary job that you have been doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator.
And I would also like to thank you, and I would also add, and we've discussed it earlier, but again, there's this larger issue of veterans coming from out of state. And it seems to me that we need to first build a foundation for vets within state that we can then leverage, because that larger problem is very difficult to solve, particularly in the current environment. In my experience, having worked with some of you folks, I mean, if you see a vet after 12, 18 months after their ETS, they are invariably very challenged. And if we could get to them sooner, if we could work better with the DOD, if there were a better integration sort of across a bunch of different departments so that you could access a database of veterans who had recently transitioned out of the active duty military, the services you could provide would be that much more successful. And that seems, that is ever the riddle about how to find them earlier, how to connect them better to opportunities that are in keeping with their talents. And with that, I just ask for your closing thoughts. But thank you both for testifying. Go ahead.
I would like to add, just this past week, we had 2 instances of out-of-state veterans that knew about not our particular services, but about the services in Orange County, that did contact us and want to come and relocate here because they knew that we could provide the services that they were looking for. So I think that says a lot for our state and for other veterans wanting to come here to relocate. Very positive.
And to mention 2 other initiatives that we have that have had a good success in drawing veterans, working veterans, into our programs so they could be a resource for other veterans. One is the Veteran Business Network, which we started a few years ago. We're up to 4,000 names in Orange County. We meet monthly now. The Veteran Business Network is an opportunity for veterans to connect with other veterans. That it's been a successful program. It's a growing program, and it's an opportunity that allows us to pull working veterans who often don't self-identify into the fold so they can be helpful. And the other is the trend towards veteran clubs at the biggest employers. We've pushing an initiative right now in Orange County to get the largest employers to set up veteran clubs. Those clubs affect the retention of veterans within the organization. Those clubs become opportunities for us to provide a solution to the HR screening problem by giving us references within the company in order to bring other veterans in. I've never met a veteran that wouldn't help another veteran, and we want to use that resource. We want that resource to be available to us. And we're seeing these two programs as being very positive in giving us tools in order to help veterans find good careers. I want to thank you very much for your support.
And thank you both. So I would first thank you for participating today. I'd like to invite you, as we move into the next phase of the legislative cycle, perhaps to come up and give us some more insight on these other programs. I think those are models that the rest of the state could benefit from exploring, and I think there's certainly a basis for the state investing in them in some ways to enhance their success. So with that, thank you both for participating, and we'll look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you.
So, halfway through. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Senator Roth, we are on a roll. So let's move to the second phase of this hearing, and the second phase, very different subject matter. The subject matter is veteran treatment courts and how best to assist vets with behavioral health issues where they intersect with the criminal justice system. California law authorizes counties to establish collaborative justice courts, including drug and mental health courts. These collaborative or problem-solving justice courts address the cases of nonviolent offenders by combining judicial monitoring with intensive treatment services over approximately 18 months. Our next panelist will speak to some of the successes and challenges that they currently experience as participants in this process. I know that Senator Roth has a great deal more expertise in this than I, and I will actually turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you for joining us. Perhaps I could have you identify yourself for the record, and we'll move my left to your right. You're busy.
That's it. That's it.
Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Lucky. I'm with the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. I'm a supervising deputy district attorney there. I've worked there since 1994, and I currently supervise our collaborative courts model. So I am in charge of the district attorney staff working in the mental health courts, the drug courts, as well as the veterans treatment courts. We are also trying to initiate a second homeless court in our county.
Thank you. Your Honor.
Good afternoon. My name's Mark Mandio, and I'm a judge out of Riverside County. I only do one collaborative court, which is the Veterans Court. The rest of my time is spent on kind of a standard high-volume court doing felony arraignments, so I get the contrast between the two.
Well, perhaps if you all could sort of highlight for us the successes that you've had, the challenges that you've faced and hopefully overcome, and some of the lessons that you've learned and perhaps the way forward.
that better? I'm normally pretty loud, but
as of 2000, much louder. That's better.
For 2016, we have in our Veterans Treatment Court alone, our recidivism rate is lowered to 10.4%. So on an average, if we're looking at a 70% recidivism rate on probation or parole, in the mental health treatment courts, that can be in the range of 29% to 30%. Our Veterans Treatment Court is presently at 10.4%, which is a significant number if you measure our participants and you look at the charges that we are taking, because we are not a court, unlike drug court. Our drug court takes very low-level offenses comparatively. Our Veterans Treatment Court takes active violence, violence in the current case, strikes on these cases, violence on priors. They can be on parole priors. We take people who have both new cases, which are have significant violence, as well as prior cases with violence. We also, it should be noted, I think, because I do have all 10 of those other courts, I have veterans in every single one of my treatment courts. So that's from homeless court, the mental health court, the DUI courts, the drug courts. Our vets are serviced in and have those services in every court. So that's probably the number one number or numerical success. I think the other way we measure it, and we do have the data for this, is cost, comparative cost on jail beds. And that's kind of an interesting number, and it's a hard number because jail beds can differ from county to county, the measurement of credits for time served. But our, for just Veterans Court, the jail beds saved have been 2,406, amounting to a $2,837,785 savings, which we deem as a benefit. And again, these are only the numbers for the Veterans Treatment Court. This does not even touch into what we're seeing now with military diversion. So I don't know if you want more. I'm happy to give you more details. But
are there any impediments, statutory or otherwise, to your continued success in your Veteran Treatment Court program or expansion of the program?
We, in the recent history, we have had to deal with Prop 47, which made felonies into misdemeanors that were otherwise felonies. And so our numbers, because our courts were taking primarily felonies because it's such a high level of supervision that a misdemeanor offense would not typically come in unless, just because it's such a very high supervision level. So when those cases became misdemeanors, we saw a decrease. And then when military diversion came in, we also saw that the misdemeanor offenses then were going to military diversion. So our numbers then kind of not dwindled, but went down. We're seeing now an increase. I don't have actual hard data as to the basis of the increase, but I do know Orange County is very engaged currently with Stepping Up as an initiative, which means the entire county is focused on the issue of homelessness, mental illness, and substance abuse disorders, and how those people in the jail and what services we offer them. So, as a large part, or at least a significant part of that analysis is the veterans. So I think we're identifying veterans earlier, or trying to. And that may mean that we're getting more referrals into the Veterans Treatment Court.
Good. You used the term military diversion. Can you explain?
We have the military diversion program pursuant to the Penal Code section, I think it's 1001.80. It is a trial diversion program. So military diversion, Veterans Treatment Court is, we get them as a pre-trial referral. They plead guilty. They successfully complete the program. The charges are dismissed and deemed as not having existed. Military diversion, by contrast, takes misdemeanors. They take all misdemeanors. And those misdemeanors are then deferred, so they don't plead guilty. They come in. We do a hearing in the outer courts to see if their case is related to their whatever the disorder is, and if that disorder is tied to military service, then they are referred for diversion. So we take all misdemeanor cases pre-diversion. It is a treatment program only. There's no supervision by probation in those misdemeanor cases, and completion of their treatment program also results in dismissal.
I see. Riverside.
All right. What we don't do is we haven't followed people beyond graduation to a great extent, but what we do have is statistics about the people who are referred. We've had about 650 people referred during the course of this program. 201 of those veterans have entered the treatment court program. 103 have graduated. We've lost 35 through terminations. In other words, they were not able to complete the program. We have about 63 veterans currently in the program, and that was as of March. Deborah Lucky gave me a statistic, though, where she followed up apparently with probation, and at the end of December 2015, so this is a couple of years ago, we had 69 grads, and they were able to look back by tracking them, and we had about a 14% recidivism rate, which is great, again, compared to sending somebody to state prison or just normally going through the system. So the bottom line is the persons we're working with, if we work with them correctly, really have a tremendous chance of turning themselves around. And those statistics don't necessarily tell that, but you know, these are guys and women who've often gone to combat, and they see themselves as honorable persons and good citizens, and they come back from war and they're not the same person, right? And they often don't even themselves know why. Then they find themselves in the criminal justice system, and there's a tremendous amount of shame and loss on their part. We get them back into intensive treatment, hold them accountable through probation and supervision, and it's fantastic to see these guys turn around. It's really that those recidivism rates that are so good are as a result of, I really think, the type of people that we're working with to a large extent. So finding that this particular group of persons in the criminal justice system and working with their particular needs has been really successful.
How are your courts resourced? Does the court system, the county court system, take the resources out of Hyde, or do the resources come from some other source? Is that a fair question?
It is. I can answer in the, ours is, it's a hybrid. All agencies take it out of their funding, so from the general fund, I guess, but each agency, public defender, DA, healthcare agency, and healthcare agency in our county provides supplemental and continuous care so that there's no break in VA services. But I have a community court, which is a very different model in that I have a separate courthouse and not to think that it's a huge courthouse. It's one courtroom. So I have one courtroom in a separate courthouse, but it's kind of a hive. I have services that are at my courthouse, and that means the VA is housed there. Voc Rehab is housed there. Legal aid comes in for issues regarding any kind of family law issues or civil issue, child support. What we do in that building is that all the services come there so that we don't have a situation where I'm saying, go take care of this and come back. Our situation is the person's right here, just take care of it right now. So it's services provided by all those agencies out of their own funding. I also tend to find myself as a scavenger for funds, and so I am very much in hot pursuit of all grant fundings that I can get my hands on. We're also, between the grant funding, the interagency funding, and if we can tap into some of the Prop 63, so I can get some of that mental health for healthcare. And then there's some of the services can be paid for by healthcare. So I have it's a very intricate system regarding where our funding's coming from.
Well, you clearly do a very good job of compiling statistics, and I gather from your report that the statistics clearly evidence the cost benefit of the program, and you're able to use it to secure additional funds. I should know how Riverside County resources its court, but Judge, I confess that if I knew, I've forgotten, and I probably never knew, so maybe you can enlighten me.
All right, as far as the court goes, at this point, we are simply funding the cost ourselves. We had a grant previously We don't have that now. Probation now has a grant, which is a good place for it, but we still have funding issues, and primarily the specific areas we have problems with, I think, are drug testing, alcohol monitoring. Those are expensive. One thing that we don't have any funding for, and the participants have to pay for themselves, is Scram. So if they have an alcohol problem, they have a device, it's called Scram, that they can put on their ankle. It'll monitor whether or not they're using alcohol. These things are critical for their accountability, and sometimes we run into real problems. One, if we have to order the veteran onto Scram, it's so expensive it can cause them to really go through some real hardships. So we have to think about that really carefully. On the other hand, it's such a great monitoring tool and accountability tool. We don't want to give that up. So searching around for ways to fund that, to have Scram available, to have drug testing available as we need it, that's probably our biggest challenge, although Deborah might be able to address that a little bit.
Your Honor, I actually agree with that, Senators. We fund individually. We do not have an Orange County-like hive or community court, which would be phenomenal, but each of our partners, and they're all integral to the functioning of this court, put those resources into the court. So we come together as a team. But what we do is build relationships with the other agencies so that we can refer our veterans over there. The VA, our strong relationship with the VA is essential to the functioning of our court. Now, we're a fairly new program. We started in 2012, so we don't have that history behind us. But as we continue to grow, the funding that we need, Judge Mandio's touched on exactly the things that we need. Accountability is key to this program. A key to help these veterans reintegrate into society in the way that they really do want to. But we don't have the funds to do that often. One of the things that Orange County mentioned that is great is how the whole county is looking towards identifying the veterans and identifying participants for these collaborative courts. We have the same in Riverside. For example, our sheriff, who isn't actually on our Veterans Court team, but is in charge of our jails, obviously. And upon entry into any of our jail facilities, that is one of the main questions that is asked to someone being booked, is whether or not they are a veteran, so that we can identify them early and provide them with the services and make them the offers of services immediately upon entry into the system. But we are in the same position as Orange County. Also, this is a really rigorous program in a time when probation isn't necessarily always rigorous for people. And our veterans really have to want this. They have to want to change. They have to want to get the help, and they have to let us help. They have to want to let us help them, because it's going to be a great cost to them in their personal lives.
This is the Scram funding that you referred to. I'd not heard that before. Are you successful? Have you been successful in obtaining grant funding or federal funding for this?
For right now, we don't have any funds for Scram, so I have to order the participant to pay for it themselves. It's my understanding that it's a county by county system. Our particular system, there's sort of a middleman. They take into account the person's financial condition, but no matter what, it's expensive. It's privately run. I don't begrudge them that, but sometimes it causes hard choices for us. Do I stop the Scram, or do I order the Scram, taking the chance that this guy's going to kind of spiral down because he just can't pay his bills? So it would be nice to have a few of those, at least, in our probation department that we can give out to those who are really needy participants.
So I realize sounds like this is a local option situation, but is the Judicial Council active in the area of veterans treatment courts in terms of identifying problems, funding and otherwise, and perhaps approaching folks like us with proposed solutions? I realize it's an awkward question. You may not know, but I'm asking it anyway.
I do know only because we have been so involved in all of our courts. Funding has changed. It's more incentivized funding with Judicial Council. So they're going to fund the collaborative courts who are best run. That is kind of a new and a shift in what they're looking at. And it's very different for Orange County to be under their umbrella as opposed to relying within Orange County. But they are coming down. They are coming to see us. They are monitoring us closely. I don't think that their funding is going to be so much on a Scram testing level. I think for us, we're looking at, we want new courts. I could house 3 courts of collaborative courts. And so that's what we're looking for. I want judges and staff in a courtroom.
Well, we'll take a look at that. Clearly, you need the tools to be available to not only you, but to the veteran participating in your program in order to ensure successful completion and transition back on their 2 feet out into civilian life. So we need to work on that Scram funding. Other than money, is there anything else that, from a legislative standpoint, that we can do to help you further your programs? We'll focus on the money.
There is one thing. I actually would have liked to talk to her first, but it was...
You can have a sidebar.
I'm actually relatively new at this. I started in January. Mark Johnson, Judge Mark Johnson, was the one who started the program. He did a fantastic job. I think he's probably the most expert at this. But one thing I noticed is, particularly in the counties that are nearby, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Orange County, we have our vets. They may commit a crime in Riverside County. They may reside out of the county. That creates an issue because our probation is a county organization, and these guys have to be intensively supervised. Or we have a situation where somebody's doing very, very well in the program, but the next step is for them to get housing, and the logical place is in another county. For instance, Los Angeles, the Veterans Administration runs a residential rehab called the Dom there. And part of it is, and there's another program they work with very closely there, and part of that is to get them to a point where they get out on their own, and their best options are often to live in Los Angeles County near that program once they progress to that point in their treatment. So we have a system now where we can transfer probation out of county, but it's just not fast enough. We promise these guys, if they're misdemeanors, if you're doing good, 12 months, you graduate, and then in Riverside County, we do a 6-month waiting period before they get their expungement, dismissal, et cetera. That is 18 months for felonies. So they're going through probation much faster if they're doing well than they would normally. The time it would take to transfer to another county, and particularly you want to get them into the other county's vet court program, is just too long. So that's something where, and I know I'm springing this on you. So
right.
If you have any comments, it's just something where I think if we could be able to transfer our vet court cases to another county's vet court program very rapidly, that would be beneficial. And you run into the same
Judge, is it a
situation.
process issue or is it a process plus money issue? Because we also have funding issues, I assume, probation department to probation department. Is it a combination, or is it?
I think it's a process issue because there's already a system in place to transfer probation from one county to another. The problem is the time it takes to do it is too disruptive to this intensive treatment program. And so...
well, we're going to have to focus on this because one of the issues, I don't know if you all can cover it or if it's the next panel, is how we take this very successful program in the counties that have it, and you all do it a slightly different way, and expand it to the total, hopefully the total 58 or so counties that we have in the state of California. And my understanding is there's some of this issue, probation department to probation department. There are issues associated with the commission of the crime, the location of the crime itself, and the district attorney's offices, I assume, that are involved in that. the court system where the crime was committed, and yet the Veterans Court may not have a Veterans Court there, and how we take a program, and whether it's through the use of technology, whether it's streamlined processes, whether it's funding transfers, we take this program to counties where they might not have the ability to set up a separate Veterans Court. I don't know if you all have thought about that, if you all have any comment on that.
I can add that for Orange County, we do supervise in LA County. So we also have clients at the DOM. We have participants for drug treatment. That apparently would be a probation decision that was made, jurisdiction for the court being where the crime was committed, the DOM being out of county for us. So we utilize Long Beach VA, which is LA County. So we kind of have a hybrid, I think, of what we're looking at, but it would take a little while to come up with a plan for all counties, because I know some of those rural counties have no VA. They don't have access to the services we do. Our VA is housed. I have a VA representative at every single one of my courts, and the county has really, as a whole, said that this is a priority. So I think we may have less problems with that than other counties, but.
And I think that goes back to funding. Our probation has a dedicated probation officer, one, for our Veterans Court. We have one DA. We have 2 public defenders. We have 2 VJOs. But it's funding because probation doesn't have another body. We have a very large county, square footage-wise, right, square miles. He can't be in Orange County supervising. He can't be in LA supervising, and go to the far ends, all the way out to Blythe, which is on the Arizona border. We don't have that ability because we don't have the funds in order to do it.
Assuming we could solve the funding problem, do you think it's possible to pair up counties and plus up funding in counties that have programs, so maybe through the use of technology we could sort of bridge the gap between the have-nots and the have counties in terms of veteran treatment court programs? Are there issues associated with the district attorney offices and jurisdiction that we would need to grapple with?
Yes, but I think those are minor compared to the services issue. For example, many years ago, I did special prosecutions and I did environmental crimes prosecution. There's a rural county prosecutor who does all the rural counties because they don't have enough individuals to specialize. So we could do a model like that for Veterans Court. However, the key component to a Veterans Court is high intensity supervision, increased services, and treatment. And our involvement with the VA, we're at the Loma Linda VA. So it depends on what services are available and concentrating those services. And then transportation and housing for those spread out counties, small rural counties. So it creates other problems. There are other problems. But yes, you could combine them. It's getting over the hump of how do we get them services?
So it's mostly funding and services. The issues that I thought would be troublesome, district attorney offices, jurisdiction, court facilities, and a judge could probably be overcome either through technology or some other legislative adjustment.
I would think so.
We see the start of it. We have the capacity to train we train and have been training other counties out of state. So we're fighting to be the national model on our end, but we're making real progress with the technology because they can come into our courtrooms, they can come into our staffings, and we really learn a lot from going to other locations and seeing how they are utilizing resources within their community. I mean, they partner up with community resources really well. It is an issue, but it's an interesting learning curve. And a lot of the other counties that just don't have those startup resources just don't have the models they just don't have the models or the startup people to run it. So,
well, you're all winners in our book, so keep doing a great job. Senator Newman.
I will echo my colleagues' comments. But question for you. I mean, you're both doing admirable work across 2 counties, slightly different. What is the basis for sharing best practices across the state right now? And what can we do at the legislative level to assist you with that obviously very necessary step?
On my end, we start with the NADCP and the national level, and we work with them because they are always on top of best practices across the board, and especially with the VA and the vets. So we start there as a base, and then they are the ones that designate the mentor courts. They designate training. They come out from DC they've trained our different courts free of charge. So we've accessed their services to start with. And then now that Judicial Council is involved, there is kind of a coordination between the state judges. I think that there's a movement towards having more involvement and more education amongst the state judges. So however that can be facilitated or helped along, we're seeing that benefit. In some counties, they're just farther along than others. So.
Is that simply a matter of funding, or is there some other things that need to happen?
It's funding, and it's also, I think different counties prioritize different things locally differently. And I think Orange County right now, and I don't think this necessarily has always been the case. Right now, this happens to be the front runner. It's the thing that they're looking at for courts, which is a good thing.
That's good to hear. Anything else, everyone? So I thank you, your honors, for your testimony. Very enlightening and super helpful as we do some of our work moving forward. So appreciate your participation. And thank you. And we'll.
Thank you.
And I would like to now welcome our next and final panel. And for the next, can I see your agenda? Do I take it and subsume it? I have that. I just don't know what the agenda is.
I may take this here.
What?
You can take it.
Thanks.
Great job.
Thank you. Here we go. So, the two combatants have now met each other. They're shaking hands. They're about to face off. And so our second panel, Outside Perspectives on Veteran Treatment Courts. I'd like to welcome from my left, your right, first of all, Nathan Fletcher. Mr. Fletcher is a combat vet of the United States Marine Corps. He served in Iraq, also in the Horn of Africa. Nathan actually also was elected to serve 2 terms in the California State Assembly and has recently been very involved in behavioral health issues for vets. He's the chairman and founder of the 3 Wise Men Foundation, which is a veteran-focused nonprofit that provides post-9/11 vets with cost-free, stigma-free, and bureaucracy-free mental health care. Also like to welcome Duncan McVicker. Mr. McVicker served in Vietnam as a United States Army officer. He's a nationally recognized advocate for programs that offer diversion and alternative sentencing for vets. We're looking to you, gentlemen, for insight, particularly as it relates to the experience and context of the veterans who are diverted and some of the challenges and successes that they experience. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
And start with Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, both Mr. Chairs. It's a privilege to be here with an Army brother, I guess, too, as a Marine from San Diego. Between the two of you and all the National Guard, I haven't been around this many Army people since airborne school. But it is a privilege to be here with you, despite our friendly rivalries and branches. We love you.
Thank you, sir.
We did give you a charity case in that football game this year, so I wouldn't get used to that. And of course, General Roth, sir, thank you. It's not only an Air Force general, you have the collective intelligence of the 2 Army guys plus the Marine all in one. So, but it is good to be here, and I want to commend you for taking the time to focus in on these issues, because I know and understand how busy legislative schedules are, and when you have the range of issues you have to confront in a state as broad and diverse as California, to spend the time to dive in really is what's needed, because I think all of us here understand the serious nature of what we're discussing. And the reality is whether we're talking about employment or education or criminal justice, we do know that during the time that we will be here in this hearing, between 4 and 10 veterans will take their own life. We know that there's an epidemic of veteran suicide. We also know that as a society, it's clear that we're failing. And the way we handle that is in-depth examination followed by bold policy action. That action has to get measured, it has to get evaluated, it has to be enhanced, and when it's been successful, it has to be expanded. And so I would, just for a minute or two, would like to share with you my thoughts on the Veteran Treatment Court and then the broader issue of stigma. You know, I went and looked up, those of us that are familiar with the Veteran Treatment Courts, we know it's established in the Penal Code, it's 1170.9, but I went and pulled up the basis for it to reorient myself with it. And it's to return criminal defendants who acquired a criminal record due to a mental health disorder stemming from service in the United States military to the community of law-abiding citizens. And I think that one of the things that across the board in veteran issues that gets lost is that treatment on the mental health issue. And so we can have all the job fairs and we can write all the resumes and we can hand out all the backpacks. But if we aren't addressing the underlying mental health issues, none of that is going to hold. And so we've seen that by doing that in Veteran Treatment Court, we have tremendous success. San Diego, I think, is a county that gets held up a lot as an example of the good that can come. We had early legislative leaders. Now Senator Tony Atkins worked on this for years. And we have a man who I am proud to call a friend, a Vietnam veteran of the Army, Special Forces, Judge Roger Krull. And Judge Roger Krull has really driven this program. And when you talk to him, he'll tell you that in his traditional courts, he sees a 70% recidivism rate amongst the normal folks who come through the process. But yet in his court, and they've quantified, they've tracked, and the number of folks that have gone through their program, and some of these are very serious felonies, some of them are violent felonies. The completion of those that have completed his Veteran Treatment Court program, the recidivism rate is 0. As they're approaching almost 100 of these folks, not a single one of them has had a relapse, a suicide, another criminal action. And so we know for a fact that counseling, we know that peer support, we know that patience, we know that getting these veterans engaged in programs where they have to give back to the community. In San Diego alone, this group has contributed over 1,000 hours to community service projects where they're now returned to what it was we loved when we were a veteran. We were of service to others. And we felt that sense of purpose, that the combination of those things is successful. We also know that they've saved millions of dollars, approximately $4 million, by lowering that recidivism rate, by not having to reincarcerate them. But more important than that, because it's always good when what's fiscally wise is also morally right. It's wonderful when those two line up. But even more than that, San Diego has embraced the restorative justice component that one of the previous judges alluded to, which is wiping that conviction away. And that helps them establish a clean record. That obviously helps with employment and housing and really helps them start fresh in terms of moving forward. We've seen a model where our law enforcement communities come together. They work together. Probation will often take all of these cases and assign one dedicated probation officer, usually a veteran who's familiar with the cases. We've also had our nonprofit leaders step up. We have 211 and Courage to Call, our wonderful programs down there, along with Veterans Village of San Diego, where they come together. But even here, where we have a foundational program that we know is really doing well, there's much more that we need to do. When you dive into the numbers, you'll see that San Diego County jails book over 100 veterans a week, and statistically, very, very, very few of those are afforded the 1170.9 opportunities. Additionally, not only just the criminal aspect, we need grants to help these veterans with their non-criminal legal issues. They may have financial problems, they may have lease issues, other things that they need. And certainly in San Diego County, there is a large group of us involved advocating in the community that believe we could do significantly better on the utilization of the Prop 63 mental health money. But that's a county with a veteran advocate who happens to be a judge who's a dynamic leader who has tremendous support. If we look across the state, and General Roth, this is one of the questions you were just asking, out of the 58 counties in California, only 29 of them have veteran courts. So that's half. That is half. And additionally, when you look at some of the surveys and works that's been done, out of the counties that have veteran treatment courts, only about half have actually embraced the restorative relief, the actual ability to wipe away the penalty and the conviction. And sometimes those issues are controversial and you can run up against opposition to that. But I believe that's really important for the long-term rehabilitation. And I believe that's important for the long-term success that these veterans will face. I would like to, as we all would like to see, more legislation and funding directed to the veteran treatment courts, along with encouraging the existing veteran treatment courts to really embrace the ability to dismiss the action, to wipe felonies away, to reduce felonies to misdemeanors, all of the things that I think that can have tremendous success. And then I think we all have to do a better job of quantifying the success. Having sat in your seat, I'm aware that every program that's brought to you saves money. If that were the case, then the state would have an unbelievable surplus. But if you can actually quantify it in a real way, then I think you can make the case to do more. General Roth, your bill, SB 339, which is in conjunction with Mr. Hughes, is definitely a step in the right direction, will be incredibly helpful. Along Senator Jackson has a bill, SB 725, that relates to the diversion programs with DUIs. That's something that can be tremendously helpful, and I think there's a lot more that we can do. But one point I'd like to make is that if we believe as a statement of values that those suffering from mental health injuries who served in the military are capable of living a productive, healthy life with counseling, with training, with peer support, with encouragement, with mentorship, then why do we wait till they committed a crime? I mean, if those things work, then why don't we do that on the front end? Because we know, I mean, we can demonstrate. Quantifiably, I can show you it works. So if we know it works, then why do we only catch it on the back end? And I think that one of the reasons, in a lot of ways, that we catch it on the back end is that's the first red flag that goes up, is that veteran gets arrested. And we say, well, okay, well, you're having problems and now you need help. And so I think that one thing that we have to do as we expand veteran treatment courts, as we do all the things that have been discussed today that are really good, is we need to have a serious and substantive effort to tackle the stigma surrounding veterans asking for help from mental health injuries. And I believe there's a lot of things that we can do here. And I'll put it in two camps. I heard someone say earlier, related to HR and hiring practices. And I recently spoke to an HR conference and convention, and I said, do any of you have a policy, stated or unstated, that you won't hire someone who's been in a car accident? And they all kind of chuckled. And I said, well, what about diabetes? And they all kind of chuckled. And I said, what about post-traumatic stress? And they were all silent. Because although it's not stated, we all know that they have a policy. If a veteran walks in and says, I lost my leg in Afghanistan, but last year I ran the Ironman, you're going to be like, wow, we should hire you. You're resilient. You overcome difficulty. You've overcome adversity. If a veteran walks in and says, because of my combat experience, I have post-traumatic stress, and every morning I surf or meditate or whatever it is they do treatment for, we know they're not going to hire them because of the stigma that exists. And we tackle that stigma by talking about it. We tackle that stigma by pointing out, we know quantifiably that veterans are less likely to commit workplace violence. It's not veterans that show up and kill everyone at work. It's white kids from the suburbs who never served. We know they're less likely to do that. We know that they have resilience, but we have to tackle this notion of stigma. An American Psychological Association report quantified and asked veterans, what took you so long? They looked at a group of veterans that had been suffering for over 10 years and said, what took you so long to ask for help? Because once they ask for help, the studies are clear, we know that they do well. Not perfect, but they do well. And they said, people will think I'm crazy. They will think I'm violent. They will think I'm faking it. They will do all of these types of things. And if we can take action and effort to try and tackle that stigma. And when you think about it, particularly amongst veterans, 2 Marines side by side in combat, one gets nicked with shrapnel, no stitch, no scar, no lasting impact. We give them a medal. We give them a Purple Heart. We give them a license plate. We honor them. But the veteran beside him, because of the exact same combat experience, has devastating post-traumatic stress. We don't give him anything. So we have to acknowledge that that's out there and that's real, and we have to begin taking decisive action to chip away at that. One thing that I think we can do in the state of California is we need to drop the D. We always talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. And with all respect to my friends in the mental health profession who are wonderful, and I love them and I support them, I don't care what their little book says. We've got to quit calling it a disorder, because veterans are not going to acknowledge that they need help from a disorder. If we would say you have combat stress injury, if we would say you have post-traumatic growth, well, yeah, that's okay, I'll get help for that. I really like this phrase, post-traumatic growth. To have veterans talk about this fact that to go out and say, I am stronger than you are because my brain was injured, but I overcame that injury. So you should hire me because I'm more resilient and I have more perseverance and I have more determination. And I think that there's a lot of things we can do. The nonprofit I'm involved in, we did a public awareness campaign where we put veterans directly in videos, veterans speaking directly to veterans, saying, I am a Marine, I fought for my country because of what I went through. I was injured, an injury called post-traumatic stress. It gets better, I'm strong, I'm better, and really putting the onus on them. In San Diego, we have a wonderful program called Courage to Call. And I love the messaging behind that. You had the courage to fight for your country. Now do you have the courage to fight for your family? Do you have the courage to fight for your future? Do you have the courage to fight for each other? Last year, I was a part of a group that supported legislation by Assemblymember Jackie Irwin that actually attempting suicide is a crime in the U.S. military. Now, there's no evidence, there's a rash of prosecutions, but we can't say we want you to seek help from things that are crimes. And so we decriminalize that. And I think that there's a lot of other things we can do. Assemblymember Rambula has a bill to actually quantify in a better way the impact of suicide and suicidal ideation. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do together as a society to really push this issue of stigma and get those veterans the help and attention they need earlier. And if we do that, then we potentially lessen the need for the Veteran Treatment Court and all of these other types of programs. And I'll just close, Mr. Chair, by saying that those of us who served in combat, we don't have to be reminded on holidays or occasions of our friends who didn't come back. We think about them every single day. There's not a day that goes by that we don't think about them. It's just becomes a part of your life. But we understand it, and we understand that we didn't choose to make the decision to go there, but we were there for each other, and we understand sacrifice and service and willingness to give your life. But what we can't understand is those that survived that combat situation that come home and can't survive the peace that follows. And so there's nothing we can do to bring back those that we lost, and we honor them, but we honor them by our action, and we honor them by action that adheres to the fierce urgency of now, that has a bias towards results. Because if what we do here, if there's one family who doesn't get that call that their son or daughter was lost in war, but not in a war zone, but lost here, then everything we do will be worthwhile. So I encourage you to continue to push. I certainly understand budget constraints. I understand responsibilities of federal government. But I just encourage you on behalf of all of us who are out advocating for those who served to keep fighting and keep going. And a lot of us will be here to stand with you. Thank you.
Well, I certainly absolutely agree that funding for mental health services, and in particular funding for mental health services for veterans in this state, is a disgrace. Right. We repurposed housing bond money for veterans' transitional and supportive housing facilities, and that's going well, and facilities are being built up and down the state. But unfortunately, the bond money can't be used for operational issues, so we build a facility. We promise veterans that we'll provide transitional and supportive services, but we don't provide the money to fund the transitional and supportive services.
Yes, sir.
Now, thank goodness the developers of those facilities, the operators, have cobbled together through grants and some federal money the funds necessary, it's my understanding, to provide transitional and supportive services. But as a state, if we were in class, we'd get an F.
Yes, sir.
So I know my colleague wants to jump in here, but from my perspective, obviously we'll continue to push funding for mental health services the best we can. I sense from your comments, your very articulate comments, that there are other things that we have done, some have done, and that as a legislature collectively we can continue to do in the future to benefit veterans in this regard. And I look forward to working with you. Some of us are not the brightest bulbs in the pack, but it's clear that there are plenty of bright bulbs out there.
You were an Air Force general, sir. I think you do okay.
No, I wouldn't go that far. But I look forward to working with you and
Thank you, sir.
Trying to help you effectuate some of the ideas that you articulated today. So thank you for your service and for what you continue to do.
Thank you, sir. One quick point on the funding, and I think this is really important, is that we do know that the primary responsibility lies with the federal government, and they create the combat veterans and they bear the responsibility. And so I'm always grateful when state leaders are willing to take state funds to backfill what is a federal failure. And so this is in no way directed at the state. But just in general, a lot of veterans that I talk to, it's a demoralizing conversation whenever the subject of funding for veterans comes up, because I hear them say over and over again, they didn't have any problem finding the funding to send us to war. I mean, there's never even a discussion of that part. I mean, there's never even a conversation about how we're going to pay for it. It's only on the back end that we have these funding conversations. And so I appreciate the state, and it is the federal, but particularly directed at the federal government. It is infuriating to combat veterans to watch this. Well, we have to figure out how to pay for it because we watch on one end where that never happens. And if we have the money to send them to war and make them, then I'm pretty sure we can find it on the back end to take care of them, primarily with the federal government.
Let me add, I think that is impressively well put, and I think to General Ross' point, you raised it, and I know I've had conversations about the MHSA monies. We as a state, particularly as, through the mechanisms and the design of these programs, could do a much better job. I mean, we are in the almost shameful position of having surpluses of MHSA funds in every county, even as these problems persist, and that's not okay.
No, it's not. Well, I live in a county that has extraordinary surpluses. I mean, it was just recently $179 million in surplus funding. And I understand the desire and the need to smooth out particularly a volatile revenue source that funds that. But smoothing out and adjusting for ups and downs is significantly different than not investing in the lives of people who need help. And I think now we're almost 15 years removed from the passage of that. And I think one thing that can be done is another hard look at how are those funds being spent? What are the best practices? And then really drawing attention to it so counties are pressured into answering difficult questions and being held accountable.
Totally agree. And with that, I think we'll have some questions, but let's turn it over to Mr. McVicker. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Senator Newman, Senator Roth, for having this meeting today. It's been wonderful, and for inviting me to speak. I would like to congratulate my colleague here on such a wonderful setup for the subject of veterans treatment courts. And one thing I think we need to all carry away with us today is the key message that when it comes to veterans treatment courts, it's all about mental health. Mm-hmm. Both the 1170.9 and 1001.80 require that for a veteran to be eligible for special treatment under those provisions, that the veteran be suffering from a mental health problem and that mental health problem be related to military service. Now, I'm a data guy, and I'm afraid I'm going to be boring from here on out compared to what you just heard, but here we go. In California, we have 31 veterans treatment courts in 29 counties, which means 2 counties have 2 of them. I see 3 issues that are facing our veterans treatment courts today, or people who are trying to put a new one together. First, 1001.80 is now 3 years old, and that's the diversion. It turns out that every veterans treatment court now has a decision to make, and they've been working on it. Most of them have been working on this for the 3 years, which is this. How and where are you going to supervise these veterans? Are you going to supervise them in your veterans treatment court, which makes sense because you already have a team in place and the supervision required and the reporting in are very similar between the two? Or is that same veterans treatment court team going to meet at a separate calendar so that you separate the people under 1170.9, which are mostly felonies, and those under 1001.80, which would be misdemeanors? Or thirdly, are you going to set up a completely separate calendar for the diversion cases, which has already been done in both Los Angeles and San Diego counties, which makes sense because of the high volume of veterans you'd expect to see there. They've just recently done that in San Mateo County as well, and probably some others. So that's one issue. A second issue, veterans treatment courts, no matter how well we do with this, are never going to address all the veterans in their counties that appear eligible under the law. And consequently, we need to develop means by which 1001.80 and 1170.9 can be carried out in the ordinary criminal courtroom. That's mostly an educational issue, I believe, but that's an issue that's facing all of us as we try to bring alternative justice to all the veterans in the state who qualify under the law. The third issue I'd like to bring up is this. I've been working for the last 7 years to help establish new veterans treatment courts around the state with some success. What I've learned is that the smaller the county is, the more likely you hear from the county officials and the officials in the Superior Court there that they are resource constrained and are not sure they can bring together the resources that are required to establish one more calendar in their Superior Court. That's an issue that needs addressing, and I'm very glad we have Senate Bill 339 before us this year, which can take the first step, but not the last step, certainly, in that direction. And to finish my comments, I'd like to suggest that there are 4 places which I have learned in my work, places where veterans treatment courts around the state can be improved. I've learned this largely through a survey that was done by my organization and Children and Family Futures, which is right here in Orange County, represented by Larissa Owen here today. We conducted a survey of 20 of the existing 24 veterans treatment courts as of 2 years ago. And we learned a number of these things. One, paragraph H of 1170.9 was added 4 years ago, and that provides for this restoration of rights and dismissal of charges that we've referred to several times today. We have learned that fewer than half of our veterans treatment courts are actually using this, which drives me crazy. How can that be after this amount of time, that this particular huge benefit, which allows these veterans to even get a job, is not being utilized? And we've got to fix that. Secondly, our veterans treatment courts, if you look at the size of the county and especially the number of veterans in the county, and then you look at the number of veterans in our veterans treatment courts, there is a mismatch here. They don't typically have as many people as they could have if they were trying really, really hard to find the veterans and create eligibility criteria to allow them into their courts. And that's something I think that can be improved greatly, and thereby serving more veterans better. Thirdly, we know from our experience around the country that a major reason why veterans treatment courts are so successful in the outcomes for the veteran participants, and just as importantly, so successful for the community in the way of low recidivism rates, is because of the mentoring programs that are part of those courts. In California today, I can guarantee you that not all veterans treatment courts even have a mentoring program. And from my experience going around and watching them operate, I unfortunately can observe that a number of these mentoring programs are not as robust as they probably ought to be. So that's an area that could use some improvement too. Finally, one of the offenses that generates a lot of controversy around veterans treatment courts is that of domestic violence. And yet domestic violence is one of the first places that these mental health problems that veterans carry home with them is going to show up. It'll show up in the intimacy of the home environment. We've got to be finding domestic violence among these offenders, preferably the very first time that it happens, get these guys into therapy, turn their lives around, and everybody will be better off because there will be fewer victimizations in the future, right? It turns out that these domestic violence rehabilitation programs that are mandated and that are used around the state, each of them is certified by the local probation department, don't serve veterans very well. It's not that the programs are not that good, although they have spotty reputations, I know. It's that veterans don't feel that they belong in that room with the other people in that group therapy program. Veterans are nervous about this. They say, wait a minute, this is not, I'm not an habitual offender here. I'm a guy who just couldn't control himself one day because I haven't straightened myself out yet, things like that. They need a program which is informed by the military experience and led by a facilitator who understands what's going on in the heads of those people and where veterans can be with other veterans and thereby comfortable in the room. I'm glad to tell you that there are 5 places in the state of California where this has already come about, where through VA programs, through VA facilities, they set up special alternative DVRP programs, and they're working exceptionally well. The first of those was in San Diego County, where the local Judge Roger Crowell, running the Veterans Treatment Court there, worked with a vet center, the one on Point Loma, to create this program, and they just started doing it without asking anybody's permission to do it, and the probation department came to them and said, that's a really good program, we want to certify you, instead of the other way around. We need to replicate that all over the state. We need veteran-informed DVRP programs to help these courts handle better the best and violent cases that they take, and then to thereby increase the number of DV cases that they can take. So those are a few ideas for us to take under consideration.
So why, with respect to the restoration of rights, why are the courts not using that tool to expunge a record?
I wish I knew the answer to that, Senator Roth.
Yeah, I gather I need to take a look at the statute. I guess the statute is permissive?
The statute requires that the defendant, thereby using with counsel, enter a motion for restoration of rights, serve the district attorney with sufficient time to the judge to hold a hearing, and then make the decision whether that restoration, in whole or in part, is appropriate. All very good law, very good criminal procedure. The problem, as far as I can see, is the defense counsel aren't doing it.
So this is not unlike other pre- and post-trial diversion programs in the state, where if you meet the qualifications of the program, in some cases, in other cases, it's restitution, whatever, and you complete the probation period, you can file your motion with the court, The judge reviews your case. If you meet the conditions, your charge is dismissed, files expunged, and you move on with a fresh start. And in this particular case, it's not the courts that are denying the motion, it's the defense attorneys that are not filing it.
That's correct. The motions are not being placed in the first place. I must say, it is true that there are a lot of diversion programs that have such things at the end of the day. However, the Veterans Treatment Court Paragraph H is really quite unique. In fact, we had to work with the State Attorney General to make sure that they could actually understand what that form of expungement was when they received an order and knew what to do about it. It is unique, it's highly beneficial, and it's a little complicated in terms of the criminal justice professionals dealing with it, but not that complicated, and it needs to be used one heck of a lot more than it is.
Well, could we adjust it or alter it to require the involvement of county personnel to, I mean, these are folks, these are vets that are moving through a Veterans Treatment Court program with, you know, detailed supervision and mentoring. So before they actually get out of range, couldn't we have the county come in and assist with the process and move this thing along?
Actually, I think it could possibly hinder the process by adding additional people to be involved. The Smart Defense Council will put together an argument for the court, a relatively straightforward argument. These are the things that have happened while the veteran was under the supervision of this court. We've obeyed the court's orders. The following improvements have been made in the character of this individual, and we feel that the court should restore all rights under Paragraph H.
Except we don't have any control over the defense counsel performance, but we have some control over the court system. So why could not the judge simply recall the case, bring the veteran back in, review the file, and expunge the record?
Now, in that one, you're beyond my pay grade. I'm sorry.
We need to work on that, though, because I think, from my perspective, and it's perhaps an uninformed perspective for sure, but we don't have the control over a civilian defense counsel, maybe a little bit of control over a public defender, but what we do have control over is the court system itself, and if we could keep the court system engaged so there's some automatic callback and review because the court knows whether the veteran has completed the conditions of the program, I assume. Is that not the case?
Yes, that is the case, and hey, I'll bring this up to my friends in Judicial Council. I think that's worth looking at. Clearly, though, that and some of the other issues I've described are largely an issue of education. There are a lot of defense counsel out there today who yet have never heard of 1170.9, much less 1001.80.
Well, I'd rather have it go on autopilot myself. If the conditions are met, then the expungement occurs and we let the veteran go on with his or her life.
I would also suspect, Senator, that if we were ever going to give medals of honor, it would go to the judges in the counties that have put these things together, because they're under no mandate to do it. They're under tremendous mandates to do all kinds of things that they have to do, and we're all aware of how constrained the resources are. But to have the judge that will take the time to get probation and public defender and DA and kind of get everyone together to put these programs in place with no additional funding, kind of cobbling it together by themselves, I suspect that there's some you have to be incredibly motivated to do the right thing for veterans in order to have these counties participate. And so I think to the extent that there were funding provided, if you did this, then we would probably see a higher participation rate. On the other side, though, one other thing, and I just remember this from the legislative history of it, is that when these restorative justice measures were put forward, there was opposition. The California District Attorneys Association opposed the legislation because they and that was a while ago. They may have, I have no idea their current position. But it was in the mindset of you don't want to expunge a record. It might have been a violent felony, and if it's their first, then maybe they get 2 more type things. And so I think as attitudes have shifted in general on criminal justice reform, I think some attitudes may have shifted. But I suspect that in some counties, you may find some kind of ideological basis behind not wanting to expunge the record of a crime that was actually committed.
Right.
And that's where I think we all, society, have some work to do.
Well, clearly funding is required, and I'm just thinking we need to take a look at the restoration of rights piece, and I suppose if, depending on the politics in the county, if the county did not want to participate in the program, then you just wouldn't have a veterans treatment court. But what I hate to see is counties with veterans treatment courts where the restorative justice piece is not happening.
Yes, sir.
And we need to figure out how to, beyond educating defense counsel, which being a lawyer, education is sometimes tough to take. We need to figure out if we can involve and how the court system in continuing with the process until the court sees it through to the end.
Yes, sir.
I guess what I'm saying.
And I also think to the extent we can highlight case studies like the one that just came out of San Diego to show the recidivism rate statistics to demonstrate that this is a not only the right thing, but it's a in the interest of public safety in terms of a population that has a lower recidivism rate.
Wow, very interesting, Senator Newman.
Very interesting. So thank you both. I have, it's sort of an offbeat question, but it came up, a reference to the veteran driver's license. So a question for both of you, having worked with lots of vets who've gone through the system. I worry a lot about gimmicky legislation.
Yep.
I think it was last year before, we passed a bill that created a new category license, and I understand the theory that it was going to be an incentive for vets to go meet their VSO, get qualified, and then the backside was supposed to give them give law enforcement, other folks, some insight as to their veteran status.
Sure.
In your experience, the experience of the folks with whom you've worked, is it working as intended? Is I just wanted to, is that good legislation, or was that a gimmick?
Well, I don't know. There's very little you could do to get me to go to the DMV voluntarily. So I don't have the tag on my driver's license just because I just don't want to go back in. I suppose when it expires, I'll be happy to have them at it. So it's hard to say like what one thing does it. I am very critical of a lot of the things that we do in the veterans community, and I don't question people's intent or their heart. But you talked earlier about the number of groups out there, and when you say, so what do you do? And they say, well, we give them baseball tickets, and I'm like, well, veterans don't need baseball tickets, and they don't need backpacks. They don't need. They need quality, competent mental health treatment. They need job training. They need a good job. I appreciate the comments earlier. They don't need a part-time minimum wage job with no benefits from a company that's just hiring them to wave the flag and get veterans with the disability rating so they don't have to pay into the health care exchange. They need good quality jobs, and they need purpose in life, and then they need to move on and take care of themselves. And I do worry in the veterans community that a lot of what we do is creating a charity or entitlement mindset amongst veterans. That isn't one predicated on when we joined the Marine Corps and the military. Look, we overcame adversity. We fought through difficulty. We never gave up. We charged, and we had no excuse. We just got it done. And so orienting them towards a mindset of that, which says we're going to give you the proper mental health treatment, we're going to give you some job training into a quality job, and then you're going to do it because you can, because this is what we do, is better. And so I do think you're right to be concerned about the volume of job fairs and the number of times we help them rewrite resumes or some of the things we do. And that's where I come back to. I really believe that fundamentally, and I've had this conversation with federal policymakers when it comes to the suicide issue, and they say, well, we got to make the VA work better. And I'm like, yeah, you should. That's great. But the VA could be perfect, and 75% of the suicides would still happen. I mean, I was at the VA Mental Health Summit, the last one. They put a slide up. 75% of the suicides never called the VA. So I think really tackling this issue of stigma and mental health in a substantive, holistic way, taking programs we know, restorative justice, veteran treatment court, I think those are the things that we should focus on. And some of the other things are probably not harmful, but I don't know that they can't be a substitute for real action.
Appreciate that.
Let me address the driver's license too. I don't have any data, and I can't testify personally. I haven't gone to the county VSO's office yet to get veteran written on my driver's license yet either. However, veterans get various benefits from just being a veteran, but we don't carry IDs around anymore once we've left the military. So the word veteran on your driver's license now allows you to walk into any of a number of restaurant chains on a certain day of the year and get half off, or to get the benefits from various kinds of retail vendors. But much more important than that is, if a law enforcement agency has been well trained, and every day more of them are being trained on how to deal with veterans and other people suffering from mental health problems, there's a post-training program that accomplishes that, but better yet, Swords to Plowshares and some other agencies have really good training programs. If that law enforcement officer pulls somebody over out in the highway and gets out and says, may I see your license, please, and looks at that license and sees the word veteran, the first thing that officer is going to do is take one step backward. because he does not want to inflame a situation with somebody who knows how to commit violence. And he was going to stalk more gently, and he's going to bring up some subjects like, well, where did you serve in the military, to get the conversation going in order to ensure his own safety. There are some really important things that happen out of these, and I love that part of it, the driver's license, for that reason.
One quick point. That earlier speaker was so astute when they talked about the community in terms of having groups, and I see it. My day job, I'm a professor at the University of California, San Diego. And we see where we've really successfully, this is something I think the state could do that would have impact. We've created a student veteran organization, which is a place for them to go and be together and be around each other. And they can share their struggles and difficulties. And I was at a dinner just recently, and I sat next to a Iwo Jima corpsman survivor. And the dinner was incredibly boring, and so he and I spent the night talking all the way through the program. And we were telling stories quietly, and he got up to go to the restroom, and I looked at his wife, and she's just crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I've been married to him for 64 years. He's never talked about it once." And he just met you. Well, there's some value to that, and we can learn some lessons from that. And that's one of the benefits of the veteran court. You get veterans with each other. You know, if some of these treatment programs, if you get them in a room with other, they're just not going to say anything. You get them in a room with each other. And so I think the state can really, particularly at state universities, community college, Cal States, and UC, is driving the creation and enhancement of these veteran service organizations where they have that mentoring, they have that guidance, they have a place they can come together. And there's other things that, and when you're looking for tangible things, your GI Bill is not tied to how long it takes us to get you through a UC. It's tied to a clock that starts, so getting them preference for courses. And then I think that to the extent that you can drive programs that get them in good jobs, the Helmet to Hard Hats program, the Troops to Teachers, those types. I think those are some substantive things that create that sense of community that can do well.
Thank you both. Any final thoughts, Mr. McVicker?
Well, I did want to comment on one point that came up earlier in one of the earlier presentations of the day. The question was asked, maybe rhetorically, how can we increase the identification? Actually, I think it was the judge from Orange County who brought that up. How can we increase the identification of veterans so that we can find out who they are early in the criminal justice system and maybe get them into our Veterans Treatment Court? And there is an answer to that question. The VA set up this marvelous software several years ago called VRSS, Veterans Reentry Search Service. And in there, any criminal justice entity, any jail, any prison, any court, can take its database, reformat it in a certain way, send it off to the VA, computer to computer. A few hours later, it comes back, and all the people on that database who are veterans are then identified from the VA. And you can find out with a great degree of certainty who all the veterans are in your county jail, in your court system, or whatever, in a matter of hours if you use this program. Only a few counties have used this so far. People see it as a little bit difficult, and frankly, county jails don't have programmers sitting around. They know how to take a database and make it into an Excel spreadsheet, that kind of thing. So there are obstacles, but this is the closest thing to a silver bullet that I know of for the identification of veterans in the criminal justice system.
On that point, related to that and the driver's license identification, we certainly as a state have to figure out a better way to take the information where veterans self-identify and use that information to drive down information regarding benefits and services in the state. And that's why I asked the question of the military department folks. And if we're not able to interface with the DMV, and if we're not able to interface with the EDD, where veterans have self-identified, then we need to fix that problem. Because whether it's a mental health services or education services and benefits, we need to, people may not ask and may not know to ask, but we can certainly, drive some preliminary information down to them to at least alert them to ask further questions if they're interested. So we need to work on that as a state, I think.
I can comment on that for 1 second. There was new legislation just a few years ago, 3 years ago, that required at every arraignment, criminal arraignment in the state of California, the judge at that arraignment must make an announcement to all the defendants present that if you are a former member of our military services, some benefits might be available to you, and you can fill out this form, MIL 100, if you want to, turn it into the court, and we'll see to it that the appropriate people are notified. So that's supposed to happen to everybody who gets arraigned, misdemeanor or felony. And so that question is being asked early on in the criminal justice system, but I suspect it's not being answered very much.
I was going to say, do we know what the compliance rate is, if that's a requirement in the court system?
I wish I knew.
Well, we probably should ask the Judicial Council. Maybe they do.
Well, and on that point, Senator, there's I mentioned it briefly earlier. Joaquin Aranbulo has a bill, AB 242, I believe, that came out of, we hear the conversation about there's 22 suicides a day. But the study, and it's interesting when you dive into that and you actually read that report, the study that yielded that number only included states equal to 40% of the population. So California did not participate in that study at all. And that number was not adjusted to reflect the population of the entire country. And so we can extrapolate, if all states had participated, given that the relative demographics of folks and the suicide rates are the same, that it would be at least you would multiply that number times 0.6. But the other thing, and this gets to Assemblymember Arambulo's bill, is the only way that they knew that it was a veteran suicide is if the coroner happened to mark that you were a veteran. But how is the coroner supposed to know? I mean, how would they know? And there was no process. And so this legislation will provide some obligation on behalf of the coroner to do some research and try and track down and ascertain if you were a veteran or not a veteran. And then, of course, there's issues when it comes to suicide. Was it actually ruled a suicide? There's insurance reasons and other reasons why. But that's why I think in a lot of ways, the number that we widely accept as truthful could be double or perhaps triple that number. And if we don't have good data, then we can't measure the effectiveness. We can't know the cost savings. We can't know what we do. And we don't know the impact. And then to your point, Senator, that's where I think then it's really easy to get diverted by things that feel good. And they well-intentioned and they feel good. But how many lives are they actually saving? And if we're not doing that, then we're not really having an impact.
No, it just sounds to me like there certainly is a database that coroners should be using to
balance off,
to correlate veteran status and non-veteran status.
Yes, sir.
Now, the fact of the matter is, the VA only knows who 1/3 of the veterans are in this country. So there really is no database except that one that's residing there at the Department of Defense that is accessed by this VRSS. It's a tough nut to crack.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you both for your service, by the way.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And thank you both for your testimony today. We have approximately 12 minutes left. I would thank you both, gentlemen, for participating.
Sure.
I would invite members of the audience, if you'd like to make a comment as part of these hearings, we'd like you to use the podium in the front. I'd ask you to state your name and 2 minutes per comment, I think, roughly, and we would welcome them. Please.
Justice Eileen Moore. Since 2008, I have been heading the Veterans Working Group for California Courts. I have a few responses to things that were said. Mr. McVicker talked about domestic violence. I want to point out that our domestic violence laws were passed as a result of a horrible problem that was going on vis-a-vis battered women in this country. That is, police officers were not being trained for domestic violence and prosecutors were not prosecuting cases. They are based on the model of power and control by men over women. I've worked a lot in domestic violence. I'm not criticizing the laws, they're well needed. But the domestic violence that's committed by a lot of our veterans is a result of traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress disorder that has nothing to do with the power and control dynamics. We have military families that are so loyal to their the person who's serving in the military or who has served in the military, who are being separated by virtue of the restraining orders that are in place. We also have, and several of the people have talked about employment opportunities. One talked about a job event having to do with law enforcement. Once somebody has a restraining order against them, they no longer are able to carry a gun, possess a gun, and it takes away a lot of employment opportunities. And I suggest, I'm not permitted to suggest what you do with the law. So that's just a follow-up on what Mr. McVicker said. With regard to that form and identifying who is in the courts, who has been in the service. I believe I stated last May when I was up in Sacramento that it was my group that developed the form MIL 100. It's the first military form ever in existence, and it was developed by the Judicial Council. At the bottom of every form before the Judicial Council, it says mandatory or optional. Our idea was that that the California courts would be forced to identify who the veterans were in the courts. And we recommended it to the Judicial Council for a mandatory form. They refused to do that. They adopted it as an optional form. Again, I cannot recommend any statutory changes. The third thing is that with regard, I just happen to have a copy of 1170.9 with me, and it's subdivision HD that provides for that restorative justice, and it does say in the discretion of the court. I suggest that before you take away any more discretion of the courts, you think through this matter, because oftentimes it's a matter of give and take among the collaborative team, and prosecutors will be much more reluctant to agree to having cases handled in a veterans treatment court if they think that somebody's jacket is not going to be following them. I don't know what the answer is, and I'm not suggesting any answer, but it's a more complicated problem that needs to be addressed, more complicated than simply taking away the discretion of judges. Discretion of judges being taken away at the because there's one wrong, I don't think is a good solution. Am I making myself clear?
Well, we certainly need to take a look at the circumstance. It's public comment, but I guess I can talk. We certainly need to.
Informational hearing, I think.
We certainly can. We need to take a look at the circumstances. We need to do a comparison between this type of diversion and other pre- and post-trial diversion programs that I'm not an expert in, but I know exist out there, and the degree of discretion that attaches to those programs, and to just see. But I think it's something that bears some review, and I understand your particular position, and I understand the comment, and I think we do need to take a look at it with that in mind.
Okay, and I didn't know you were a general.
No, ma'am.
I was only a second lieutenant.
I am just I'm just a state employee.
General,
Your Honor.
One more thing. The predecessor, a couple of predecessors ago to Judge Creeper, who's here, who does a marvelous job, it was Judge Wendy Lindley, and she knew I was a Vietnam veteran, and she asked me to round up the mentors for the Orange County. At first it was a Combat Veterans Court, which I did do. And that core of Vietnam veterans still acts as the mentors in this Veterans Treatment Court. And I told Judge Lindley that I would take care of, mentor any women that happen to come by. Women don't come by very often, and I have an idea of what the problem is. But when you talk about the 28, I wouldn't have gone to law school if I could do math. What's 31 minus 58? 27? 27 veterans treatment courts that do not, or 27 counties that do not have veterans treatment courts. One of the suggestions that's been bandied about is perhaps remote access to a veterans treatment court where it's closer to a VA hospital and VA facilities. But I want to point out that just being a mentor for all these years, I realize what happens in the outside the courtroom when the judge is busy with the collaborative team preparing for the afternoon or morning session, that there's a certain esprit de corps that goes on among the defendants that are in these veterans treatment courts, and there's a real value to having somebody actually come to the courthouse. And I don't know if a traveling veterans court is the answer or what it is, but don't forget the value of being there in the courthouse with the other veterans. And there's a shame value involved. That is that they're ashamed if they have let the rest of the defendants down. Thank you for the time.
I think they describe it as the new unit, and the judge is the commanding officer, and
Absolutely.
the sergeants are there to help them.
It really works, too, and it's impressive to see it.
Thank you for your service, ma'am.
And thank you, Justice Moore. Please. We are coming up on the end, so I would respectfully ask to keep your comments as brief as possible, but informative.
Yeah, I'm Steve Blount. I live in Cypress, and I'm a trustee with the North Orange County Community College District. And the voters passed our $574 million bond, and priority one was our veterans centers at our Fullerton College and Cypress College. And last Tuesday, at our board meeting, there was a presentation on Cypress's Veterans Center, and some would call it the Taj Mahal of veteran centers. And the idea was no expense was going to be spared in developing this, and the architect was really sensitive to the veterans and kept working to see what they needed and what they wanted, even the configuration of the whole center. And they have, I call it a victory or bridge, because the quad for Cypress College is a pond, and it leads right into the Veterans Center, which has the 5 service flags, and it looks like the brand new 2-unit command headquarters at the Los Alamitos Armed Forces base. And so it was, done to perfection. And part of it was they have 4 or 5 areas that address some of these stigmas that HR people have a problem with. And one of them is I call it a peace garden, a victory garden, and it has a tree there, and where the veterans can put dog tags on it. And it's just, and the leadership of the veterans have some of these post deployment challenges, and so it's interesting that the architects worked with him. The other thing is I'm very familiar, very close to a band of Hogan's Heroes, and my son is Hogan, and they're combat veterans, and they have no problem changing jobs. They hold a job for a year, and then they change jobs. One wants to be a professional wrestler and says, I'm quitting because I got a match, which you would call a show, and others. And the whole thing is their confidence. You can't let a veteran lose his confidence. And part of the good thing about job fairs is before you hand them the resume, they get to see your body language. You get to see the look in their face and the look in their eye. It's like, oh, you can do the job. Can I have your resume? And I've seen that proven over and over. And so job fairs can help in that. But if you get to the supervising person anywhere, in a construction, a warehouse, a manufacturing plant, so think, look, yeah, I believe you when you can say you can do it. And lastly, my father-in-law, 92 years old, just recently came to live with us, with my mother-in-law, 91, and he was on the battleship Maryland in World War II, and he was a gunner's mate in number 2 turret, and a kamikaze pilot crashed into number 1 turret and blew up the turret, and 44 of his shipmates, gunner mates, lost their lives. Not one word about his experiences. Finally, we found a couple of his cruise books. We went through them. But it wasn't until he came to live with us at age 91 that he opened up about his experience of World War II. So, to your point, that's very important.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senators. Thank you. My name is Chuck Haeflinger. I am a veteran mentor in the Inland Empire. The Reaching New Heights Foundation serves both San Bernardino County VTC and Riverside County VTC. And what was said by the panel members regarding VTCs, amen to everything that's been said. VRSS is also on my list, and the Assemblyman talked about an overview of using VRSS, Victor Romeo Sierra Sarah.va.gov. Working in the vetting of candidates, this is a very helpful tool because we have so many vets out there, and our courts are at a saturation point, at least the two in San Bernardino County. The probation officers, the attorneys, ourselves as veteran mentors, we take on more than we're supposed to, we're expected to. If we can properly vet these candidates, we do have mental health records, physical health records, law enforcement records. Sometimes we get a DD-214, which is the record of their military service, sometimes not. And as a combat veteran, I'm partial to fellow combat veterans. And this will help us in the process to figure out who has the best chance of being successful through the VTC 12 or 18 months down the road. And that will help our recidivism overall. So it works both at the macro level and at the tabletop level. And so I would highly encourage, and from a legislative point of view, I would just ask you to be supporters of encouraging use of the Veteran Reentry Search System. And I certainly love PTS more than PTSD. Our culture needs to adjust its sights. And I thank you for all that you're doing. And that's perspectives from inside of VTC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have time perhaps for one more comment, if we do have one.
Certainly. I'll hit it from right here.
Please.
I read Mr. McVicker's...
Actually, we want to record you for posterity, it turns out, so if you wouldn't mind.
Certainly. My name's Richard Valdez. I'm Legislative Director for Disabled American Veterans, Department of California. And I want to thank you for allowing me to give a little bit of testimony right now. I've read Mr. McVicker's survey, and I agree with everything he has to say. With regards to the mental health, that's a key component of being able to help our veterans that are going through either incarceration or the justice system. And one thing that I believe needs to be taken care of in this regard are the CVSOs and the VSOs providing the benefits and claims process procedures necessary for our veterans that are going through this that typically do suffer from mental health issues, and to get claims going so that the financial ends of many of their concerns hopefully are taken care of. With regards to the employment, some of the things that I believe are extremely important are really conducting a economic assessment of what industries are providing jobs, not only in the communities, but also in the state. In conjunction with that, more information with regard to what the requirements are for county jobs, city jobs, and jobs in the private industry. And in conjunction with that, what are the educational requirements, the skill levels, and then matching those up through a database with regard to the MOSs and these skills so that it's more readily available and understood by EDD and even the employers. And the last thing I'd like to say with regards to that is what's important, I believe, are the transportation nodes. As we're all aware, traffic is hell, and better utilization of the metro and the bus system and better access to transportation so our veterans who need that sort of support have a viable way of getting to the jobs that are there. So that's it in a nutshell, and I'll talk to you further.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mendez. So with that, any closing comments? So I would first like to thank everybody who participated in today's hearing. Totally grateful. Your testimony, your input is invaluable. It will inform both of our efforts and the efforts of our committees moving forward. To the folks who attended today, thank you as well. To my colleague, Senator Roth, I completely appreciate you making the trip all the way from Riverside, but I will say, and I'm grateful for your mentorship and for your leadership, and so we're all very fortunate to have you. And I'd also like to thank the very capable staff of the Veteran Affairs Committee, so Wade Teasdale to my left and Cindy Baldwin. So thank you both. You make this job both easier and more enjoyable, I'm grateful to serve, and I'm grateful to have had this opportunity. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.